card for a parking problem.
And 423.
Yeah, that's where I'll get a 28 from one truck when you're ready.
Go ahead.
From one truck, White Lincoln X-ray 985 should come back up 10.
So you had 2000. Patrick Spalding.
10-4. If you can just put a little note in something like that, I'm going to be leaving a note on his vehicle advising him to remove it.
Fine. Fine. Rockingham 505. 505, enter vandalism case for Athens, complainant, soon to be ex, slasher tires, and has made threatening comments to her. She's concerned he might return.
Yeah, forgive this at 32.
10-4. You're assigned to a vandalism case in Athens. Did you copy the 505?
Yeah, 4. No 3 in Depot Street. Truck boy entry 5.
7435.
10.
10-4.
Can you go 643 again?
143.
You go with that 43 you had. I didn't hear any, but I had just looks like we do.
10-4, I just wanted to know if you should be put back 76 to Cabana Circle or to the subject's address.
Yeah, I'll be 23 back on that found property case, and I'll be 76 to the Williams Road address to see if I can find the owner.
10-4. 449 1120.
Now 449 1121, thank you.
10-4.
Code 4. 4.
Rockingham 535.
Green College.
535.
U.S.A. You guys know if our woman who fucked into the house. I'll slide up that way.
Caller is now been able to close the front door. She's now pounding on the door, trying to get it still. About 5 foot long dark hair, got tie-dye shirt on, and number 21 is on.
We have separation. Excuse me. When men sow the wind, it is rational to expect that they will reap the whirlwind. That's Frederick Douglass. Sometimes I feel like I might be like that reporter covering the twister who gets too close to the shot, if you know what I mean. This was the text that I woke up to on April 18th, 2023. It says this. Take a look at this. Multiple police agencies involved. Biggest story in the country. Similar texts from other law enforcement people came to me that morning, and they all linked to Turtle Boy's story on the case. So, I was like, should I cover this? I called Tom Fleming that morning. I was like, what do you think? And he kind of encouraged me to go forward, but for some reason, I really had hesitation. I'm not even sure why, but I had hesitation. The whirlwind. I feel like we're all in it now. There's a sense of a powerful storm that is heading towards a crescendo, events accelerating, no one sure of the outcome. And not just of the trial, it feels like something utterly unique, as any big historical moment is. And no matter how close anyone is to the center of the whirlwind, the witnesses, the victim's family, Karen's attorneys, Karen, no one really truly understands what's happening. You feel the powerful destructive forces, but with something like this, you don't truly understand it all until you reach a vantage point, some point a little down the road in the future, where you can look back at things with some perspective. I've been off the air for a couple of weeks because the publisher of the book that's coming out did a 180 again and decided to actually publish it before the trial. Now, I hadn't worked on it since early December when they had changed their mind back then. I was largely done by then, but still a lot of work to do. And the publisher did a 180 back then, and they decided they wanted to wait to publish it till like July. So I stopped working on it. And then when the publisher did this 180 again on a whim, now all of a sudden they wanted it like yesterday. So that was a couple of weeks ago, and I spent about 14 days working 16 hours a day, crazy, just to try to get this thing done. And I stopped all the other work. I had been working hard on a video series on this. Now I'm not even sure if I'm ever going to release that. So anyways, it was a really, really long, grueling stretch. And when it was turned in this week, I was physically, mentally, and emotionally drained like nothing I'd ever done before in my life, I don't think. I don't know. And I've been drained a lot. So I've been following all the mini develops in the case, though, while this is going on. And we're going to talk about them today. I might need your help to remind me of some of them. That's what you guys are there for. Now, one thing you don't really need reminding of is that I am not an expert on any of this. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a homicide investigator. Certainly not a forensic data analyst. Should I even be sharing my thoughts on any of this at all? Do I have any business doing that? I don't know. I've made some big mistakes covering this case. I've hurt people, and out of my ignorance. And I don't want to do that again. So if I just shut the hell up, mission accomplished, right? Let smarter, more experienced people talk about the case. I don't know. But, I've had a couple of days to start recovering from that grinding process of finishing the book. So I'm not physically exhausted anymore as I speak to you right now. But there is still a feeling of having gotten too close to the whirlwind just so I could get some footage of it, right? Like that reporter, I forget which movie that was about the global warming thing, the end of the world. It was kind of crazy at the end where the wolves are attacked. I don't know. It wasn't a bad movie, though. But I think it was based on an old book called The Coming Global Superstorm. But I forget the name of the movie. Anyways, I did miss being here with the group because we don't have thousands of viewers like some of the other channels, but we have a core of intelligent, introspective people, each bringing something different to the table that helps our collective understanding. As the whirlwind tries to suck me in, I hang on to them, and they keep me somewhat sane. The witnesses, the victim's family, they got sucked into this whirlwind because they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And they've been stuck in the center of it. It's hard to breathe in the center of a storm like that. It will take them great strength just to survive. But they will because they have each other. So the book is not an anti-Karen Reed book. From this point in time at the center of the storm, we can't actually even really understand Karen very well. That will be done at some point in the future by smarter people. Some distance is needed, though. I think time gives us that. I think even she needs it to understand herself. The book does not discuss intent. Before one gets to intent, the question of whether or not Karen actually struck John has to first be settled. This was what the jury got stuck on. They couldn't really address intent until they settled that question. The prosecution presented a very flawed case. Look, there was an enormous amount of evidence to manage, a large number of witnesses. My sympathy. Nonetheless, some of the mistakes were fundamental and based on bad decisions. John's injuries are somewhat odd for a hit and run. The attempt to explain them by the prosecution was impotent, unconvincing. But the defense made its own fundamental strategic blunders. Man, there's irony in that, right? None of these lawyers on either side are idiots. They're all talented people. Adam Lally is a capable man. I mean, he just mastered digital forensics just for this case. His sidekick, McLaughlin, writes brilliant motions with a literary flair. David Yannetti was an elite student his whole life and jumped right into the Suffolk County Prosecution's office right out of law school. He's done famous cases, both as a prosecutor and as a defense lawyer. Alan Jackson, I mean, he's as close to a movie star performer in court as we've seen since Johnny Cochran. These lawyers are all somewhere between very good and the very best. Yet, they all fucked up. Excuse my language. It's like watching a Super Bowl where both teams are great, but they have the worst game of their lives. No one deserved to win. The prosecution mistakenly thought that 12 people would hear, I hit him, and send Karen to prison for 20 years. It was not a confession. If it was, we wouldn't be having a trial. The prosecution thinks Karen took actions early that day before John was found to cover up the crime. Well, if she was trying to cover up the crime, why was she at the same time confessing? Doesn't make sense. Now, people smarter and more experienced than me say that in the stress of that moment, the truth can come out. I believe them. That could be what happened. But that's not the question the prosecution needed to ask. The question is whether 12 people will unanimously agree that she was confessing. All 12 have to see it that way. Not one person was going to be troubled by the discrepancy of her supposedly trying to cover things up while at the same time confessing. Not one juror was going to ask if she was just confused, if she was asking whether she hit him. If the first responders understood, maybe they misunderstood what she said, or were they unintentionally influenced later on at the station? Honestly, it was especially unfair what the prosecution did to those first responders, because the prosecution didn't put enough effort into proving their case by the physical evidence. They put the whole weight on those first responders, or a lot of it. And that pisses me off, to be honest. So these people, these witnesses, first responders, they live under siege now in a fire station fortress because the prosecution couldn't put together their case in a convincing way without relying on I hit him. The prosecution spent one damn day preparing with their most important witness, the trooper, who would present the accident reconstruction theory to the jury. That they expected 12 people to send someone away for 20 years on that presentation that we saw last May is beyond me. Now, like I said, maybe I should shut up and say nothing. But I said this the day the prosecution rested. You can go back and see the tape. I said the prosecution would not win. Then I said it later that night on court TV. And for months before, I said almost the same thing or very similar. I said, if there's no smoking gun in the voicemails, and none of us knew what was in those until the crime, and there was no smoking gun in them, then the state has to prove their case with the hard evidence. That evidence was there, but presented in a way that it would be a miracle if even one juror understood it, let alone 12. The most crucial evidence was the correlation between the vehicle data and John's phone data, but no single witness put that together for the jury. But on the other hand, there was no acquittal either, right? Apparently, 9 jurors voted guilty on manslaughter despite that flawed prosecution. That can only mean this: the defense also blundered. How? In order to get on a jury, you generally have to be respectable. You're likely to have no criminal history. You probably have a stable life, a steady place to live, a job. So you're more likely to have some faith in the system, the courts, law enforcement, first responders. A jury is more likely to see these people as like them, stable, rooted, law abiding. But the defense went after these people like they were murderers, gangsters, schemers. That had to piss off a lot of that jury. I recently watched Katie McGaughlin's testimony again. The defense tried to portray her as being part of a murder cover up, but her testimony was really credible. It was detailed, the little things that she added in. It was very credible. She wasn't making it up. How does the defense think that the jury reacted to her, that woman being portrayed as though she was connected to some crime family? What about Allie McCabe? And she would have seemed to those jurors like their daughter, or at least the daughter they wished they had. She's a clean-cut high school kid, giving people rides on a Friday night, rescuing a stray dog before the storm. The defense tried to suggest she was part of some murder conspiracy. Maybe running, calling around, helping him clean up and hide, faking screenshots of text messages, lying to police, lying to grand juries, lying to them on the jury. Most decent human beings were infuriated at how she was treated on the stand. How do you think the jury felt? They were in the room with her, just sitting feet away. No, I think Karen should not pay her legal bills, to be honest. She got ripped off. She got really ripped off. That defense failed her. The defense team bombed worse than the Chiefs did this past weekend. In the Super Bowl, Kansas City had invested enormous resources in their defensive line. In their offensive line. And they have one of the best in the league and maybe in history. Yet Mahomes got crushed, sacked many times. What happened? Bad game plan. Sound familiar? They thought Philly was going to blitz, which is when you bring in an extra guy to go after the quarterback. And the plan for Kansas City was to just find the open man. Because when you blitz, usually there's a guy open. But Philly didn't blitz. They did something risky. They spread out their 4 defensive linemen in an unusually wide formation. That makes them really hard to block when the quarterback drops back to pass. But it left them open to the run because they're spread out. So now you got these huge holes on the line. So that was a gamble, but that was the strategy they chose. But Kansas City didn't come at them with a game plan based on running. So that's how they screwed up. So literally that game was lost in the practice week, in the game plans when that was decided. Andy Reid, one of the greatest coaches of all time, maybe the greatest coach of all time, he came up with the wrong game plan. You know, if those two teams were to play again next week, each team would have a completely different game plan. And the result could be very different. I mean, the game certainly would play out different, whatever the end result. Karen Reid's defense team likely believed the prosecution would bring a powerful case with the physical and the data evidence. So they decided to try to destroy the witnesses and convince the jury there was a wild conspiracy to frame her. Maybe they felt they had to do that because they've been telling the public this narrative for a year. I don't know. Maybe it's something simpler. At the bar I used to own, we had a back room with a small stage for bands. The problem is that when a band plays in a small room, each musician tries to compete with the others to be heard. And so what happened, like for instance, the guitarist tries to compete with the drummer. And then the drummer takes it up a notch to overcome that. Next thing you know, the music in the room is too loud. Nobody really wants to be in it. Let me give you another example. I used to go out with a girl who went into federal law enforcement. Now, not long after her class graduated from the academy down in Georgia, they were up in Worcester for some event outside a downtown club. As they were leaving, someone maybe gave one of the group some trouble, but all these people had just spent weeks learning special skills that would be useful in a fight. And when you have those skills, it's natural to want to use them. So that actually makes a fight more probable. Alan Jackson is one of the best cross-examiners there is. This guy is Tom Cruise from A Few Good Men. The problem for him now is he has to contain that urge to use that skill when it doesn't make sense to use it. You try to make Jen McCabe look like an arch criminal on the stand. How does that really come across to a jury? I know how it comes across with the mob that's watching this. They don't count in the trial. This whole thing that they're trying to sell with this PR campaign that's been going on for the year and a half and convince the public about this conspiracy theory, that's in the hopes that one or two people that are affected by that slip onto the jury. And that did happen in the last jury. One, the dismissed juror, was going around during the trial getting drunk and going in bars and saying, I'm a turtle rider and I'm going to acquit Karen. She should not have been on that jury. So the defense campaign succeeded in getting someone like that onto the jury. She was obviously willing to lie to get onto that jury, and she was willing to raise her hand every morning when the judge says, did you see any news accounts on this? I guarantee she lied every morning. She must have been following the case closely with Turtle Boy the whole time. Then one of the jurors that got selected as an alternate showed up the next day in court crying, wearing pink. So she was probably a turtle rider too, or at least a Free Karen Reed person. So Jen McCabe is a soccer mom. And in a tiny little courtroom, Alan Jackson tried to portray her as Lex Luthor, a murderer. A murderer accomplished a murder. Someone actively participating in the murder of her friend. The father, or the acting father, of her daughter's best friend. Now that's crazy. That's risky. That's a bad idea to do that in front of a jury that's sitting feet away from her. Now, yes, she got angry. Jen did. Of course she did. She could see through his tricks. She got angry and she stood toe-to-toe with him. But how did the jury perceive that cross-examining by Alan Jackson? Well, I'll tell you how. They put themselves in her shoes and they said, this is bullshit. And then, like the band members competing with each other in the small room, David and Eddie tried to do the same thing to Alan. And I forget the order. He might have come before that cross-examining might have come before. I don't remember the order of it. But either way, they're competing with each other to show who can dismantle a witness. So then you got David and Eddie trying to take apart this all-American kid and turn her into a scheming murder accomplice. He had to show that he could outdo Jackson, right? So the defense cost Karen any chance of getting an acquittal because they utterly pissed off a lot of those jurors, I guarantee it. If the defense just focused on establishing that the prosecution didn't prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt, they might have won. They might have got an acquittal, but they didn't even come close to that. So in 7 weeks, we're getting a rematch of the Super Bowl. And the game plans will be a little different, but I don't think dramatically different. The goal of the defense will be to get the jurors to say, but what about as many times as possible? So they're going to throw a lot of stuff out there, like they have been since day one in this case, right? Or since day one, I should say since April 18th when they first pushed it through Turtle Boy. So they're going to do that again, but I think it's going to be different this time. I don't think they're going to try to destroy witnesses like McLaughlin. That's not, or even the McCabe's. That's not going to look good for the jury. The jury is not buying into if the defense is, if what they're selling is these people are arch criminals, not just that they were willing to do something like murder, but they were scheming and manipulating crime scenes. Jen McCabe has no criminal history. Does that make sense? No. But if you can just create, that they will use 227 because you're just trying to create enough random things to get people asking questions about what about. So, but I just don't think they'll attack. I don't think they're going to do that stunt that Alan Jackson did in the last trial where he made Jen McCabe read the document and say that she made the search at 227. That was a stunt. And Alan Jackson may feel slick when he did it, but I don't think that probably had a good effect on the jury. But they will have to say that Karen was framed. They have to. There's no other way. Either Karen was framed or she did it. Now, there's no middle ground. And both sides know it because all the physical evidence from the Lexus was found at the crime scene. So unless that evidence was planted and so much other evidence, like the vehicle data, and John's phone, which shows he never went in the house. So unless they can find a way to convince the jury that all that stuff is rigged and planted, manipulated, manufactured, then Karen did it. There's no middle ground. It's not like somebody else was driving down Fairview and struck John and they just got the wrong car. No. So I predict the prosecution will present a much more convincing case, and the defense will do kind of the same that they did last time. They just won't hammer some of the witnesses in the same way, especially the women. Now, the theme of the book that I have coming out is that I started this case ignorant about how much of the sausage is made. Forensic data, autopsies, evidence storing, homicide investigations. I knew shit. What I did have was nonstop questions and a healthy skepticism. I knew that the job of a defense is to create doubt, and they do that by pointing at seemingly odd things. And our job in the public is this. We first have to recognize that we are ignorant about many of these processes, much of what goes on, because we've never experienced them. We can learn, but we have to be patient. You have to seek the answers. For example, the troopers didn't get any ring surveillance video from the neighborhood or the route along which Karen traveled, including from the house across the street, Deputy Chief Kelleher's. Why not? Is this suspicious? Did the troopers intentionally avoid collecting that ring video from across the street or anywhere else in the route for some nefarious reason? Was that part of the framing of Karen? Or were they just lazy? Well, it turns out the answer is quite mundane. And it's something any one of us could figure it out, either by using logic or by just spending 5 minutes to research it on Google. Ring video is motion triggered, which I think you all know this, right? Maybe we don't think it through, but we understand your video is not. Most of us have ring video on a house route, not by now, right? And it's not sitting there recording all day. That'd be crazy. It is triggered by motion. So, like the UPS guys coming to your house with a delivery, it's triggered by that in order to make a tape. Now but it's that motion that triggers it. Now, if you look this now, the way I first looked this up was I went to Copilot, which is a Microsoft Bing's ChatGPT, but there's many ways to look this up, and the answer sometimes varies, but it's always within 30 feet. I mean, in fact, let me ask it right now and see what it says. Object to trigger ring filming. Let's see what it says. All right, so this time it said 30 feet, and that's the answer that I usually get. I've never had more than that. I asked, sometimes they might give you 20 to 30 feet. Sometimes I've even seen 15 to 25 feet, but 30, I think maybe once I might have seen 35 feet, but definitely never anything longer than that. So, but anybody can do this. You can do this research on your own. If you free Karen Reed, you won't, because you really don't want anything that's going to ruin this juicy little narrative, right? All right, one of my cameras. So this is, if you look at the Kelleher's address, I'm not going to pull it up on the screen, but it's somewhat diagonally across the street. There is no way that assuming that whatever door, I don't know what door the ring video would have been on the Kelleher's, but it would have to be within 30 or 35 feet to have picked up the Lexus. And I'm going to say that the distance is at least 50 feet and maybe 70, 75, 80 feet. I'm not sure, but it's nowhere near being under that 30, 35 foot range, not even close. So it was just not close enough for the motion on the street. And this is how we want it to be. This is how you would need it to be. So like on my street, I would say that the street is maybe, I've never measured it, maybe 50, 60, 70 feet from the Ring camera. And during the day, a car goes by maybe every 20 seconds. So on average, 3 cars an hour. Do we want a film record of every single car that goes by every time there's actually a lot of people walking a dog too, or walking or jogging? Would we want the Ring to start filming every one of those? No, of course not. You'd use up all your memory. I mean, so it's, this is something though that you can find this out by looking it up, or you can just think it through like I just did here, right? But nobody in that group does that. That's what's stunning to me. So when I first started, let me take a sip of coffee and let me just check to make sure you guys can still hear me. All right. I'm not someone that uses Reddit for a lot of things, but a couple years ago, people asked me to start looking into the Delphi murders, and it was 6 years since those murders. So, however I did it, I ended up using Reddit as a source. Actually, other cases too. The Murray girl case, the UMass girl that's missing. Some Reddit groups have bullshit on them, right? It really depends on how the group is run, but it depends on the size of the group. But what happens is you have this filtering process. If you have so with the Delphi case, there were thousands of people that were members of those groups, but there was some diehard, group of I guess regulars that are in there. And if someone comes in and has a question or has a theory that makes no sense, the people in there that have the facts are going to just say, no, that doesn't make sense. And they're going to explain it. So over time that filters out a lot of the bad information. Right. And that's how social media can work well. And I actually use this a lot for cancer research too. You're looking for some things that might give you an edge that hasn't really been approved yet by medical science. But you got to be careful because there's so many crazy cancer cures and things out there. I mean, really, really crazy. But if you have a large enough group, there is a little bit of a filtering process. And, it's kind of like if you're looking up Amazon on something to buy, you're looking at if thousands of people have bought this product and left reviews, that helps you make a buying decision, right? But this doesn't seem to work at all in the free Karen Reed groups because nobody is... on and on this goes. I mean, Nick Rocco on Court TV every single night brings up things that have been thoroughly debunked. I don't have time to debunk them. I only get a minute and 30 seconds. And it never ends. I believe that Nick believes this stuff. But that's the other thing. Why doesn't, but nobody in those groups, nobody, like all the hundreds or thousands of people that are in the free Karen Reed groups, nobody can point out that naturally Ring video has a limitation. You don't want Ring video picking up every jogger on the street and every car driving by. Not one person in that group can point that out to those people. Not one free Karen Reed person, someone who really believes in, but they can't say no, no, but it doesn't seem to happen. And if I don't know, I don't go into those groups much anymore. But I just never even saw that back in the day when I was members of them. The original Facebook group. Nobody was asking any damn questions. It's amazing. Goes again. I don't spend time there now, so maybe it's changed. I hope it is, but it doesn't seem to have, because when you look at the free Karen Reed people that talk on Twitter, none of them know the answers to these things. Is there one single free Karen Reed person that understands either logically or because they've looked it up that there's a limitation to the distance that Ring will pick up the motion of an object and begin making a recording? Is there one? Has anybody even seen one of the hundreds or thousands of people that participate in those groups? There are thousands of people watching Turtle Boy's videos. Is there one person in that mob that even asked that question or has that basic understanding that anybody could learn in 5 minutes? A fifth grader could learn the answer to that in 5 minutes, but they don't. So what is going on here? And there's so many issues with that. Now look, there are legitimate mysteries in the Karen Reed case still. And I'm not saying they're not, and there always will be, and there are in any case. And so I'm not saying that everything has been debunked, but 99%, well, I would say 90% of the things are easily debunked. And then there's another, 5 or 7 or 8% that are kind of debunked. And then there's a few, because, there's a couple of percentage that'll always remain a little bit of a mystery. But it's just unbelievable. The simple explanations for most of these things, and none of them know it. And I don't understand that. I don't understand the phenomena. I don't understand why people are in there. They're just, nobody thinks. They just keep repeating what they hear. And not one person asked the question. I've been hearing this about the Ring video for 2 years. They haven't learned anything. I don't understand that. And look, our job in the public is to be fair to both sides, but it's also to be skeptical. We need to ask probing questions. We need to seek the truth. I mean, in a lot of these things, if you really want the truth, you can find it out in less than 5 minutes. Why not do that? Does someone want to believe in a conspiracy that bad that they don't do that? I don't get it. So for me, that's the main goal of the book, is to get people to start recognizing that we are all ignorant. We're all ignorant about much of this as you start out. So you have to keep asking questions, apply some skepticism, especially to any defense team, because they're just trying to create some doubt. But you have to patiently seek the truth. So let's finish by going back to that Frederick Douglass quote. When men sow the wind, it is rational to expect that they will reap the whirlwind. Well, who sowed the wind here in this case? Karen and her team. What is the whirlwind that resulted? The mob. It's us, I guess. And who and what will that whirlwind destroy? Well, that remains to be seen, because a whirlwind is unpredictable. Thank you, guys. Every once in a while, I like to do an opening monologue for you. And I know some of our friends out there, like Nima, use them to go to sleep to. So happy to do that for you. So we had a lot of things happen over the last couple of weeks, and I was paying attention to all of them. I just was so busy I didn't have time to come on and do a show. So I will address them as best I can. I haven't set up in any particular order. And so let's see what's some of the stuff that's going on. We've had a lot of motions and things like that. So I don't think I'm going to read from it, because it's too involved. But there was the big ruling this week by the SJC denying the defense's motion to drop charges 1 and 3. And I don't think that should have surprised anybody. It would have opened up Pandora's box had the SJC ruled that. Now, I myself believe there is a strong case to be made that it should have been done differently in terms of the jury instructions and still the jury form, things like that. During the trial, Alan Jackson complained about the jury form. And I said, when I listened to his argument, I said then and there that I agreed with it. So thank you, James. And we'll definitely come back to the questions in a moment when I get caught up. So, but I did agree that the jury form should have been more clear. And I think maybe this should be, I don't know how this kind of, it would have been a mistake to establish this kind of precedent by throwing those charges out. And especially in this case, when it was kind of a sham, because the defense team, every chance it had during the trial, every time the jurors came out with a note saying they were deadlocked, every time they argued vigorously to the judge that she should declare a mistrial. So now we're supposed to accept that they didn't want a mistrial? It's absurd. It's absurd. And but it is interesting, and I do sympathize with the confusion the jurors felt. And there should be maybe there should be a little bit more guidance as to how they should proceed. I'm not blaming the judge because I think the judge is doing what was standard. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I could be wrong on that. But my understanding is the judge is just was performing those in that way, um, for the most part, in every way that was standard and done in all of her other cases and in every other case in Massachusetts. I did talk to a retired judge a few weeks ago who said she did think it was a mistake when she was watching live that Judge Canoni did not just say to the defense, "Do you agree?" Um, it's kind of considered somewhat automatic that once they have an X amount of notes that have come out and the jury has said, we're stuck here, that at some point they issue the Tui or the Tui Rodriguez instructions. And it's not a rule, it's not a law, but it's somewhat of a standard that after those instructions, if they come back with a similar note that suggests they've had no progress, then they dismiss them. The judge will dismiss them and declare a mistrial. But technically, she probably did need to check with both sides to make sure they agreed with that, because they could have had an opportunity to make an argument why she should not do that. Now, she didn't do that. Again, the defense, there's no question that had she said, as she had done all the other times there was notes, she would ask that. And the prosecution each time argued for the jury to continue deliberating, and each time the defense argued for it for a mistrial to be declared. That probably would have happened again. There's no question the defense would have done that. I think the prosecution, Adam Lowy, probably would have accepted it just because it's standard after that Tui Rodriguez instructions. But you don't know. But as a formality, the judge should have asked them. But if the defense did, and the argument I think the prosecution made in the SJC was one of the arguments is that if the defense truly objected to that, they could have just said, Your Honor, hold on a second. We object. They didn't. So it would have been unfair or unreasonable to force those charges to be dropped just because the judge didn't go through that formality of asking them that, I think. But I think there is an argument to be made that in the future, judges should be more careful in this, and an effort should be made to be a little more clear to the jurors what's expected of them and what their options are. Let's see what else we had on the table. There's a motion here. I don't know if you guys want me to read it out. Defendant's motion to reconsider reciprocal discovery order. So I think what this is about, and I just read it quickly before the show, is it sounds like weirdly the defense might be sitting on something about Jen McCabe. And what they talk about is how it changed in the trial, or Jen hadn't mentioned that she went into Officer Lank's house of the Canton Police the next day. And then under further questioning, she did admit that she did. So what happened was, and she explained the circumstances. I'm not going to read the whole motion. I'll bring it up on the screen, though, for you guys. So I don't want to do that. All right. So this is defendant's motion. Let me see if I can make this bigger. All right. Respectfully moves this honorable court to reconsider its reciprocal discovery order regarding the defense pretrial production of impeachment evidence related to the Commonwealth's anticipated trial witnesses. So Jen McCabe is a chief witness for the prosecution, and reciprocal discovery. So do they have some information that they strangely don't want to put in discovery? That's weird. So again, I'm not a lawyer, so I would be. They go on to explain why they shouldn't have to produce this. I don't want to read the whole thing, even though it actually is interesting. And they go over some of what happened in the first trial. So at the trial, Jen saved this information for cross-examination after questioning. So the cross-examine, that's when she first she appears during the prosecution's case. Adam Lally asks her questions, and then she's cross-examined by Alan Jackson. And so after questioning McCabe about a different topic, Jackson asked her, did anything significant happen on January 30th in connection with this case? Any meetings, any get-togethers, anything you can think of? So obviously the defense sounds like they knew about this. Somehow they knew, they had information on this back then. And she said, I went to the O'Keefe's house. And Jackson said, other than that, anything else? And then in this document, it says, in response to that open-ended question, without any indication from Attorney Jackson regarding the answer he was seeking, Miss McCabe volunteered with this answer. So this actually, I don't know. I remember at the trial, I don't know. I'm not, the way that it was, that suggests the way that it was asked there, that the defense had some information, but I don't know if they did. It may have just been a matter of Jen remembering something and volunteering it. So this is a quote they have quoted here from her testimony in the trial. On the way home, she says, Kerry Roberts' daughter is good friends with Michael Lank. So we dropped her off at Michael Lank's house, and Mike's wife came out of the house. Him and Kerry are friends, and she, jumped in the car and was consoling Kerry and asked how the O'Keefes were doing. And, we talked to her. So what the defense wants to do here is trying to create this impression of these people getting their story together as far as the framing of Karen. Now, all of these people grew up in Canton, and they're similar age, most of them. I think Kerry Roberts grew up in Braintree, where John is from, but so she lives in. But most of them grew up in Canton, and they all live there now. And most of them have kids that are all in school together around the same age. So Kerry Roberts is someone who had been a very, very close friend of the O'Keefes since at least when she and John were in high school together. I mean, she was friends with the whole family. Just to remind people, she's the one that went and picked up John's parents to bring him to the hospital to meet Paul there. So that's how close they were. Now, prior to that day, she had only met the McCabes once. So they were not part of that circle. And I don't think she had ever met the Alberts. So this is just one reason why, but the defense chose to not cross-examine Kerry Roberts at all. It's absurd to try to put Kerry Roberts into a conspiracy theory to help people she barely knows kill one of her best friends. It's crazy. Michael Lank, if you remember, was the cop that came into the house. So when people say that no Canton police went into the house, that's not true. So Jen McCabe called her sister twice and her brother-in-law once from the street, and neither one woke up. So she went up to the door. I think she rang the bell, and then she must have just tried the door and it was open. So she went inside. She went up to her sister's and her brother-in-law's bedroom and woke them up. Now, as they got dressed, by the time as they were coming down the stairs, Officer Lank was already inside the house. I don't know if he just walked in or probably Jen had come back down the stairs after while her sister and brother-in-law were getting dressed, and she's probably the one that let them in. But again, from Lank's perspective too, none of that he would have taken from that. That's just one of several signs that nothing suspicious went on here, because nobody's trying to lock the cops out. And then he's there to see the Alberts come down the stairs, and he testified they looked like in particular, Brian had just woken up. So Lank spent, I think, 20 minutes talking to them. And before he left, Matt McCabe arrived. And then he went outside to help with the investigation, with the leaf blower and all that stuff. Then, some point after that, Brian Higgins arrived at the house. And so inside the kitchen would have been the Alberts, the McCabes, and Brian Higgins trying to figure out what happened. And they remembered at that point, they were starting to realize that some of Karen's behavior was odd. So they called up Michael Lank and got him to come back. And he came back and they gave him some more information. Now, Michael Lank testified that his relationship with Brian Albert is, quote, civil. So they're not friends. They know each other. They're from the same town. Now, apparently, Kerry Roberts' daughter is good friends with Michael Lank's daughter, I guess. And so at this point, it's reasonable to ask, why is Kerry Roberts and Jen McCabe together? So this is the point, because of what they had gone through the day before, that they start a relationship together. But they didn't have one prior to this. And they've been through a traumatic event. They've lost a very good friend. They both have, but especially Kerry, who's known her for much longer. And so they drop off Kerry's daughter at the Lank house. And, it's not clear from this, but for some reason it was more than just dropping her off. They had to wait there. And so Officer Lank's wife came out, apparently, and got in the car. And they would have talked about the tragedy from the day before. And it says him and Kerry are friends. So maybe that might mean that Lank and Kerry are friends. I'm not sure what she meant by that. And so they talked a little bit there. And then apparently, I think at some point, Jen said she might have gone in the house to use the bathroom. So the defense is trying to question, like, how come none of this was brought up before and that kind of stuff. And again, this is a long thing that gets into the law. I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but I could be wrong on some of this. So, we'll see what a lawyer says. But I think that the prosecution is just doing its due diligence, and they need all discovery, any evidence that the defense has. So they don't want to be, it's, trial by ambush, where suddenly the defense tries to impeach Jen McCabe's credibility on the stand by confronting her with something that the prosecution didn't know existed, some evidence. Like if the prosecution, for example, didn't know that Jen went inside Lank's house the next day. So whatever they have, there's, the prosecution wants them to share it. And I think that's normal. But again, you got to get a lawyer to talk about this. All right. So let's see what else we got. All right. So the jurors are not, some of the jurors are not too happy about the SJC ruling. Now, I don't want to read into why they're not happy, but we can speculate. So one of them is supposed to go on Turtle Boy's show tomorrow night. And sorry, let me just take a quick drink. This is not bias, what I'm going to say here. I am suspicious of any juror in this case who is going to go on the Turtle Boy show. Here's a guy who has many times, tried to get the mob to go after the foreman. Now, that foreman's been outed. We can't prove that it was Turtle Boy that did it, but Turtle Boy would give the signal, and then minutes later, the guy's name appears underneath Turtle's post. So either that's somebody that's a Turtle rider that's taken the signal, or it's just one of his many alt accounts. I don't know. But it's pretty clear that this guy is not somebody that any respectable or credible juror would want to deal with. However they felt about the case, even if they were free Karen Reed. You spend 10 weeks locked in a room with 14 people, 15, it's I think at the start. And you get close to those people and you feel a bond with them, even if they end up disagreeing with you on the case. So the idea that Turtle Boy is turning his mob against that foreman, a normal juror, whether she agreed with that foreman or not, would be very upset about Turtle Boy's actions. But the juror that's going on Saturday is not. So, I mean, unless this, you could say, well, is there some other motive for going on the show? I mean, if you just want to be out in public, but none of these jurors have really wanted to do that. You've just had a few that have reached out to Turtle Boy, and Turtle Boy got one of them in touch with Phelps. And so we had an actual recording on Phelps' podcast in the last episode 10, from one of the jurors. And that juror sounded very intelligent and very reasonable. And maybe that's the same one going on the show Saturday. I don't know. But there's a lot of reasons to be suspicious here about some of these people that got on the jury. I've already told the story of the dismissed juror. Look, I don't care. I have no problem with any juror that went on there and honestly did their duty, never lied on the jury questionnaire, never lied under oath. And they were not convinced by the prosecution's case. And they voted to acquit on all three. I had no problem with that. As long as they did their job honestly and paid attention, you have no problem with that. But you get a juror that's going out, getting loaded at night, coming in hungover with their mind already made up. That's a problem. And the alternate juror that shows up in pink the next day crying, that's a problem too. I don't know anything about that juror. But it sounds suspicious to me. Was that juror going to be honest? Is that one of the jurors that has reached out to Turtle Boy? I don't know, because that juror was not in the deliberating room. And she could have been crying just from that. She could have been crying just from she spent 10 weeks with these people, and now when it's time for them to deliberate, she gets pulled out of the room. So, and separated from them. That would be emotionally hard to go through, because like I said, you build a bond with people. Those people in that room. It's a small room, and you're in there all the time with them, and it's you're not allowed to talk about the case, but you talk about your lives and stuff like that. But for her to show up in court the next day wearing pink too, that's very troubling. To me, it's very troubling. And this is why the defense has chosen this strategy. They know that they were able to, if you do this publicity, contaminate enough of the jury pool that you're not going to get a lot, but you might get 1, 2, 3 jurors that go on there that really have already made up their minds. All right. So this juror that was upset about the SJC ruling, there's a couple of comments here, and these went to Christina Rex, the reporter from NBC affiliate. I forget. I'll tell you in a second. Actually, I only have one quote. All right. After serving as a juror on the Karen Reed trial and seeing the chaos that has unfolded since, it is clear to me that the criminal justice system in Massachusetts needs some work. Despite being one of the most progressive states in the nation, so many aspects of our criminal process are antiquated, confusing, and need to be updated. It would not infringe on the role of the jury to require all trial judges to provide clear instructions that help jurors comprehend all aspects of the job they are tasked with. Similarly, it would not intrude on the jury's function or the sanctity of the deliberative process to require a uniform process for delivering verdicts and verdict slips, particularly in cases involving multiple count indictments. Making these kind of changes to ensure criminal defendants receive a fair trial seems like the bare minimum our courts owe to those whose liberty is on the line. Now, that's a very well constructed. I agree with all of that. So, but to do it in reaction to the. I agree with that. At the same time, I also agree with the SJC that there was no reason here. I mean, if you're gonna undo that in the Karen Reed case, you have to do it in every case, right? I mean, because these are how the jury instruction. These are how the jury instructions are done in Massachusetts. So yeah, it might be antiquated and stupid, and it needs to be improved on. I agree with that, sure, but that doesn't mean the SJC ruled wrongly. I don't think they did. So let me see if someone had told me. Let me see if Christina has anything else on this. So she's dubbed. So this is Christina Rex from WBZ. All right, let me just see if she has anything else on this, because I thought she maybe had another letter from a juror, but maybe not. I don't see anything. Okay. All right, so that's probably the only one. If somebody else knows of another one, just email it to me, send it to me, Facebook me, whatever, however you guys usually communicate with me. All right, so today there was also, and to my knowledge, it is not available yet, and it should be available Monday, but there was a motion from the prosecution for sanctions against the defense. So that's interesting, right? Turtle Boy said it had something to do with, and he does have connections to Karen, that he said it had something to do with Proctor and the messages. I don't know, maybe. I mean, my first guess on it would not have been that. So my guess is that it would have to do, and a lot of this stuff is nonsense on both sides. And it's when I say it's nonsense, I don't mean it's not real, but I mean it's not going to be, the judge is not going to impose sanctions on the defense. The judge is not going to dismiss this case. A lot of this back and forth stuff is just baseball. It's not going to, it doesn't impact things. So my guess was that the defense is trying to make this idea that videotape was destroyed from surveillance video from the garage, and there's some kind of wrongdoing because they didn't share the video of Higgins' phone call outside, blah, blah, blah. Look, there's no reason. Let me ask you this. Is there any video that's been provided, put into discovery by the prosecution of Michael Proctor and Yuri Buchanan bringing the evidence that they gathered on that day to the evidence room at the DA's office? So they would have brought in John's clothing, which they picked up at the hospital, John's phone, which would have been put in one of those little electronic bags in airplane mode, the cocktail glass, and the shoe. Well, that goes with the clothing. The straw. Well, actually, I'm not sure if the straw was found that day. And I'm not sure. The taillight pieces may have been delivered by Tully. I'm not sure. But at the very least, Proctor and Buchanan, who never went to the crime scene that day, but they went back to the Sally Port with Karen's Lexus, and there they started, that's the end of their day. They start getting together the evidence that they collected, and then they bring it to the DA's office, which is a mile away, and there's an evidence room in the DA's office. Proctor and Buchanan do not have access to the evidence room. We learned in trial that only Commander Tully had access, and the two troopers that are assigned as evidence officers have access. So we've all seen those TV series where, this cocaine is stored as evidence inside the room, and the drug-addicted cop sneaks in there and grabs some coke or something, whatever. But there's reasons. So, two specific officers, two troopers, get that designation as evidence officers. So what they do is they deliver it to just outside the evidence office. Apparently there's a processing area in there. And John's clothing would have been taken out of the bags at that point and laid out on the processing area to dry because it was wet. And we learned during trial that it stayed there to dry for a few days. And then at some point, when it was deemed dry, an evidence officer bagged it again, taped it with the seal, and put what, when it was bagged and stuff, and brought it into the evidence room. So I guess if you believe that Trooper Proctor was sprinkling microscopic taillight pieces on the clothing, he could have done it while it was drying out there at some point in those days, right? Oh, boy. The imagination that people have is unbelievable. So, but again, every aspect of the district attorney's office, every room has surveillance cameras in it. Every room. So there would have been surveillance video of Trooper Proctor and Buchanan showing up at the DA's office. And I don't even know if they both went. Maybe just one of them brought the evidence. I don't remember. But there would have been surveillance of them showing up, and there would have been surveillance of them going into the room and laying out the evidence. But why would you save that? I mean, you're gonna give surveillance video of everything that happens in a. You might have to just say, screw it. We're not gonna have a justice system anymore because we don't trust any of the police even to just do normal things, normal routine things. So of course not. There's no evidence of that. But there's also likewise would have been no reason to have evidence of Karen's SUV showing up on the back of the tow truck. Now, we're lucky we had some of that evidence that was saved, but there would have been no reason to save it. And when this stuff is saved, it's not like a phone, you need the extraction. But you don't get an extraction of a DVD machine. You just give over the video. It's the same thing with body cam video. Most cops now, they're required to have body cam, right? And if something happens, they get if there's an incident, right? There's a shooting or whatever, they take a copy of that, but they don't give you over the camera so you can do an extraction on the event, on the whole thing. It's not done that way anywhere. So this is all just that is all that stuff that the defense, most of it is a game, trying to make it sound like there's something sneaky or suspicious about it. Now, look, don't get me wrong. There are some things, the fact that the surveillance video from the Sally Port wasn't given to the defense until April of last year. I don't know if that was a retaliation because the defense hadn't turned over any of their reciprocal discovery material until right before the trial either. See, the defense is not required to turn it over until the prosecution has signed off the form, I forget what it's called, but that says that they have now turned over all of their discovery material. Once that is turned over, then the defense has a finite amount of time, but they have to turn over all of theirs. Now, the prosecution had held off on one thing, the hair, because the prosecution couldn't sign that letter saying that they had complied with all the rules of discovery because they were waiting on the test until very late in the game, until right before May, I think, even, for the testing on the hair found on the rear panel. So it may be, so the defense apparently wasn't turning over anything in the discovery, and they were waiting until they were absolutely required to turn it over. And so it's possible that the prosecution retaliated a little bit and said, well, we've given you almost everything, but we're going to hold off on this until the last second too. So you get this kind of gamesmanship. I don't like it. But it doesn't seem that Brennan likes that either, and he wasn't playing that kind of game. So there are legitimate questions about that stuff, but there's nothing nefarious about it. The questions of why this now retired Canton cop, I don't know if he was a detective or whatever, but had saved a copy of that in the cloud. Why did he think to save what happened that day? Do they normally do that? I mean, maybe they do. That guy probably needs to testify, right? I don't know, but you're not going to no more than you found anything nefarious in anything else in this case. It's just going to be another nothing burger. The judge is not going to let this interfere with the trial. It's not going to be the basis for a motion of dismissal, and the prosecution's effort to get sanctions against the defense team. We'll see what that specifically is Monday, I think, but it's going to go nowhere. It's a waste of time. It's not a waste of time. It's whatever. It's a waste of our time to spend too much time on it because it's just the way trials go. and it's this kind of gamesmanship that goes back and forth. And it seemed to have become actually pretty personal between the defense team and Adam Lally. Maybe that's normal too in these big cases. I don't know, but maybe Brennan will eventually get there too. He didn't seem to start out that way, but we'll see what happens. I don't think he was too happy about the way his action, his willingness to go the extra mile to accommodate what the defense wanted in coming to look at that video system. They threw it right back at him to try to make it seem like there was something where he resisted him in some way, which he didn't. So I think maybe he might eventually end up siding with Adam Lally and saying, all right, these guys, I'm sick of their bullshit. But at the same time, the defense they have to play their games, because that's their job, is to try to create doubt and to make everything look suspicious. That's their job. So the prosecution's going to have to put up with it and just understand that if they were in their shoes, some of that stuff, they'd be doing the same thing too. So let me see what else we had. These various motions that came up during the week. All right, so we got, all right, let's put this one up here. This is regarding the feds, which is still the most interesting part of this case. Actually, there's a couple of things regarding the feds. So let's focus on the feds for a little bit. All right. Time is it? 9:06. All right. The Commonwealth moves pursuant to trial court. Oh, did I share this with you guys? Yes, I did. All right. The Commonwealth moves pursuant to the trial court rule 8, Uniform Rules of Impoundment Procedure, that exhibits A and B to the Commonwealth's motion to exclude employees of ARCA be filed under seal and impounded. That's because there's letters. So it says these letters contain the Commonwealth's written request for discoverable material from the U.S. Attorney's Office and the U.S. Attorney's response. So for some reason, this has to be locked up. Now, I'm not trying to make the fact that it has to be locked up seem super mysterious. I think, again, a lawyer would have to explain exactly, so it says in consideration of the protective order endorsed by the Honorable Denise Casper in the U.S. District Court of Mass, so that's the federal judge, these letters could be considered confidential. It says could be, interesting word, could be considered confidential and not subject to public disclosure. So maybe this may have just been erring on the side of caution. But boy, I would love to see. So obviously Brennan and the prosecution sent a letter to the U.S. attorney, and they got one reply. And this is all now being locked up. So, and the letter was in pursuant to the TUI request. So, as I said many times, the way it works is the feds, if they are informed by the prosecution or by the defense, if they are asked for any potentially exculpatory evidence, they are required. They're required. Whatever the status of their investigation is. Doesn't matter if their investigation is ongoing. They are required because of the TUI. I think that's I forget the name of the case, but because of Brady versus Maryland, it's considered Brady material. So, and that has nothing to do with Tom. So any exculpatory material that the one branch of the government has, if it's exculpatory to a defendant, they're required to put it through this process called the TUI process, which just makes sure that the evidence that's being turned over complies with federal rules and so forth. But they don't have a choice. So if the feds had, for instance, some evidence that showed that John went inside the house, they don't get to hold on to it and wait till their investigation is over to wait. So these people falsely understand that, including former federal officers such as Sean, that the idea that they can just hold off and they work at their own sweet time. No, they have to turn over exculpatory evidence to a defendant if they are asked by the defendant or the prosecution if that evidence exists. So anything they had before the trial, they had to turn it over. And so Brennan is asking if they have any more. So that if they have any more, that would be evidence that they gathered after the trial. And we don't know what the answer was. For some reason, this has to be put under lock and key. So, for instance, if the answer was no, I don't know why we couldn't just hear that. I don't know why the U.S. Attorney's Office wouldn't just do the right thing and reveal that. Does that hurt Karen's case? Well, it hurts her attempt to try to portray this conspiracy theory, but so fucking what? We're not. The U.S. Attorney's Office doesn't exist for the purpose of trying to help Karen Reed. Yeah, that's strange. The purpose of the government is to get to the truth. So, but I don't think the U.S. Attorney's Office understands that. They don't. Well, they understand it, but they don't care because the thing that they care about most is protecting themselves from embarrassment. That's always going to be the case with rare exceptions when it comes to the federal government. They will protect themselves. Doesn't matter which party is in power and whose U.S. attorney is in power. That's how they operate. Look, we've seen this over the last 4 years with Director Wray at the FBI. He's a Republican, but he has stonewalled Republicans in Congress every step of the way to the point where, I mean, it was disgusting. The stuff that they withheld because they knew it was they knew they were guilty of wrongdoing in the Russian investigation, and they wanted to hide it. And Director Wray may have been, in terms of his ideology or something, leans Republican, who knows? But his team is the FBI. And that's who his loyalty is to. And if there's something in there that embarrasses them, he doesn't want it out. And I think it's the same thing with this new U.S. attorney, Foley, who seems to have spent her life in the U.S. attorney's office. Those are her guys. She goes to the cookouts with them. Their kids date, or whatever. They take vacations together. They're not going to, she's an insider. The only way you are going to get this truth to come out is if you have that rare person of integrity, and unfortunately that is rare, especially in the federal government, or if you get an outsider that was brought in. But so the day I heard they brought in someone who had basically spent her life as a prosecutor, I was like, we're not going to get the truth. We're never going to get it. We're never going to get it. So, but I'm curious as to, and we'll never know here probably, but what was in that letter? What was the U.S. attorney's reply? Did they say our investigation? Did they say when the investigation ended? Did they say we have no further evidence for you? I'm going to guess they must have said that because you would have seen, you remember last year, for those people that are didn't start following this case until the trial, all through last spring, July, so January and February and March, picking up in court in every hearing, the defense was talking about this federal evidence but this has not really been a topic in this time. So, you heard, for instance, David Yannetti saying, "Oh, the feds have a Quantico trained office and a Quantico trained forensic investigator has confirmed 227 exists." We don't know what he was saying or what he was basing it on, but they were talking about that federal evidence. There's been no similar discussion now. So it would be shocking if any new evidence was put into the TUI process, any real new evidence. Now, we also know that the Brennan has tried to get the communications from the ARCA guys, the communications from the U.S. Attorney's Office to the ARCA guys. And so that would, in theory, have to go through the TUI process. But it sounds like the Fed said, no, we're not doing it. So I'm going to get to that document in a moment. It sounds like they said, nope, we're not going to play ball. So that had to be sealed up too. So let's go to that document. All right, let me bring this up. This is an interesting document. I know, guys, there's no way to make going over a document Interesting, right? But a court document, how do you make it interesting? But like I said, you can do like Nima, my friend Nima from Sweden, and many other people do. Just use my voice to go to sleep. All right. So let's. All right. I'll make this bigger. Oh. All right. So the Commonwealth moves to exclude the defendant from calling employees of ARCA. So that means that the feds did not give over. So the basis for excluding ARCA was reciprocal discovery. And that is, we don't know exactly what the U.S. Attorney's Office asked them to do. We only know what the ARCA guys testified that they were asked to do, but we don't have those actual communications. And so Brennan, presumably in that letter to the U.S. Attorney's Office, said we need to see these communications. And the U.S. Attorney said, "Go suck an egg." So they wouldn't give it. So now, as a basis for that, the Commonwealth is going to try to exclude the ARCA guys from testifying. So, all right, the Commonwealth moves to exclude the defendant from calling employees of ARCA, including but not limited to Daniel Wolf and Andrew Rentschler, due to the defendant's failure and inability to comply with discovery obligations revealed during the defendant's first trial. Wolf and Rentschler were two experts retained by the federal government in furtherance of the U.S. Attorney's investigation of an unspecified federal crime. Oh, that is interesting, too. I didn't notice that before. So here we have it. Now, at this point, Brennan has read what the 3,000 plus pages that were turned over last, I think it was March, from the feds through the TUI process that they had. And Judge Canoni at one point had indicated, I think, that from having read that herself, she had an idea how the investigation started in the first place. But here it says, an investigation of an unspecified federal crime. Unspecified. Interesting. So what was the predication if we don't know what the crime was? Obviously, the crime would have been public corruption. But still, why was it unspecified? All right, both Dr. Wolf and Dr. Rentschler admittedly did not review all pertinent and relevant evidence that exists in this case, which they didn't. They never saw the text stream data, among other things, among many other things. They both asserted that they did not speak with the defense prior to their testimonies and conducted experimentation and analysis that exceeded the facts and evidence in this case. Interesting. So that's probably because they're probably referring to the cocktail glass cannon that Dr. Wolf was so gleeful about what they designed to see if, on the theory that John threw a cocktail glass that found a broken cocktail glass to scene, and if their theory was that maybe he threw it at the light. So, these guys started out having no idea. They weren't given anything or given very little. Nonetheless, the court permitted both of them to testify. The parameters of the experts' opinions were not provided by the defendant prior to her first trial, and portions of the experts' opinions were not expected nor properly noticed. I don't know what that means. We know. All right. So when they were called in, first they had to be a voir dire during the middle of the trial, where the judge questioned them on their qualifications and their conclusions. But nothing came before the trial. So the prosecution didn't really know what their conclusions were before the trial. But I'm just reading this again there. So portions of the experts' opinions were not expected nor properly noticed. No, so I don't know how to divide both of those things. Are interesting. So not expected. That could be just the prosecution saying, "Hey, we got the text stream data and shows that there was that what happened in the accident." So that these guys concluded something very different was not expected. Maybe that's enough, or properly noticed. Not expected nor properly noticed. I guess just because I'm gonna say that the ARCA guys, because they didn't write down an expert affidavit on what they on what they concluded happened. I'm going to guess. Again, I'm just guessing. I'm probably getting a lot of this wrong. Furthermore, during the first trial, Dr. Wolf and Dr. Rentschler testified to reviewing information that was not known prior to rendering their opinions. That would be the text stream data, among other things. I'm sorry, I'm going to read that again. Dr. Wolf and Dr. Rentschler testified to reviewing information that was not known prior to rendering their opinions. And this was not previously disclosed. So I actually don't know what that is. Testified to reviewing information that was not known prior to rendering their opinions. That could be the text string data because the Commonwealth waited until very late to do the chip off, the first chip off, I think in December of 2023. And the reason they waited was because they were waiting for an update to the entertainment systems software. That update never came before the trial. It came afterwards. So they got new data than the most recent chip off. We don't know anything about whether it was helpful or not, or what was in it. So I'm guessing here that maybe what they're saying is that Dr. Wolf and Dr. Rentschler drew their conclusions before that text stream data was available, and it was never available to them. And this was not previously disclosed to the Commonwealth. So this is an unbelievable case. I mean, no one that I have talked to, lawyers and whatever, or judges, no one knows of a case where the federal government, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the FBI were investigating a police investigation before the trial. It seems unprecedented. And not only investigating it, but closely communicating with the defense team. Just stunning. Prior to and during the defendant's first trial, the Commonwealth repeatedly moved for reciprocal discovery from the defendant, citing a restraint and inability to comply with part of the code. So let me scroll up and over. All right, while I'm doing this, how you guys doing tonight? It's 9:22. It's a Friday night, and hopefully you're all getting dolled up and ready to go out. But I suspect our audience is a little older, and that's probably not the case. Like my age. Those days are over. All right. The defendant failed to provide the Commonwealth with any discovery from ARCA, which really just means they didn't have any. But to allow the defendant ample time to retain her own experts and to prevent any delays in the trial, the Commonwealth renewed its request for discovery. Again, discovery is just about what the feds told them, enumerating 13 areas of discoverable materials related to ARCA from the defendant. The Commonwealth notified the court and the defendant of its intention to move to exclude. So they were told a long time ago that they're going to try to get ARCA excluded if the feds don't allow this information. So the judge is going to have to rule. So based on the defendants, and the reason they told them this ahead of time, because they didn't want the defense to delay the trial saying, oh, shit, we were going to have these guys testify. If they can't, God, we got to get some new experts. So So based on the defendant's repeated failure and inability to comply with the law on reciprocal discovery, to date, the defendant has filed no response nor produced any additional discovery. And again, the defense understands this is not a criticism of them, because they have no control. This is something that the feds have control over. On February 6th of this year, Attorney Jackson indicated to the Commonwealth and this court that he intends to call the ARCA experts, presumably the same two, Wolf and Rentschler. On this past December, the Commonwealth filed a written request for discoverable material, as we talked about. And the Commonwealth and defense received a response. So on January 30th, and again, this is what the arrogance of this is. So on December 4th, the Commonwealth filed a written request to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And knowing that the trial was on April 1st, the utterly arrogant and unaccountable U.S. Attorney's Office didn't reply until January 30th. And their reply was, "Yet, no soup for you." Why would it take them almost 2 months to reply? I'm telling you, there's so much shady shit going on here with the feds here. We can talk a little bit more about it. So much smoke there. There is a real conspiracy here. I don't know, and it involves the feds. And I'm not someone that thinks that conspiracies don't happen. I didn't start out thinking that the conspiracy against Karen Read was impossible. It's a matter of looking at the nature of the evidence and coming and realizing that it's not possible. But that was just because of the nature of the evidence. All right. Peculiarly, despite the formal 4-page letter received on January 30th, so 4-page letter, that's the one that's now under lock and key, under seal, but 4-page. So there was, I don't know, maybe they just messed around in those 4 pages, but that's a lot of pages to just say no. Following the party's appearance before this court on February 6th, the Commonwealth and defense received an email. So that's in addition from the letter, I guess, from the U.S. So yeah, they've had the letter came on the 30th, and then the email came somewhere after the February 6th or around that. An email from the U.S. Attorney's Office stating that their contract with ARCA ended on July 31st, and should either party wish to engage ARCA for additional analysis, any further engagements must not infringe on any federal privileges. We don't care about your privileges, goddamn arrogant. I've had it with the federal government in this country. And that is not a criticism of the many thousands of great federal agents, FBI people, other agencies, ATF, DEA, Customs, Border Patrol, that are doing their job to keep the country safe. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the levels of power where decisions are made, the utter arrogance and unaccountability. It's just stunning. It's just stunning. It has to stop. It has to stop. And that's when I talk about the whirlwind here, where it ends up, I don't know. But so what are these federal privileges? Probably just about the letters and the other messages from the U.S. Attorney's Office originally to ARCA, all that stuff. But oh, God damn. All right. So the criminal code demands reciprocal and expert discovery. As the proponent of the evidence, the defendant bears the full obligation of Rule 14. And so the code provides for an automatic exchange of discovery regarding intended expert opinion evidence. The defendant cannot shield herself from discovery obligations by citing restraints by the U.S. Attorney's Office, or by now perhaps claiming to have independently retained ARCA for additional analysis. So they can't go and just hire the ARCA guys now and say, well, pay no attention to what happened earlier when you did your investigation and the U.S. Attorney's Office hired you. We're hiring you now. And so the state is saying they can't do that. And it's the judge that's going to have to decide. And man, I don't envy her, because this stuff, what precedent is she to lean on? Right? This is unprecedented. The Commonwealth remains unduly prejudiced by the defendant's delays in providing appropriate discovery and notice of the Commonwealth to the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth has diligently sought expert discovery from the defendant and the U.S. Attorney's Office for approximately 10 months. I remember it was stunning watching this in all the hearings last spring. The judge would, they would talk about the Fed stuff, and the judge would say it would extend to the U.S. Attorney's Office an invitation to bring someone to the next hearing so they could explain what was going on. Because she's sitting there, she's waiting on a trial that's coming up, the clock's ticking, and she's hearing all this stuff, but has no idea what's going on. She only knows there is a federal investigation into the investigation that she's about to oversee the trial. And they don't have the respect or the decency or the honesty or the integrity to send someone to her hearing and explain to her what's going on. They never did. They never once sent anybody to it. It was stunning watching it last year. And I think she was frustrated and should have been. And so then in April, the Boston Globe petitioned for the federal materials that have been produced during the TUI process to be made public. And that a large part of that was the federal grand jury. And the judge said, well, I'm not bound. I didn't sign the protective order. The protective order prevented the defense or the prosecution from leaking any of that or making any of that public. But she said, I'm not bound by this. So she clearly felt it was the right thing to do to make at least some of that public. And finally, you get this response from the U.S. Attorney's Office that was just sitting there doing nothing, arrogant. And they responded with a letter that threatened, through a law that hasn't been used since the Jim Crow era, to take over the trial, take it out of her hands and put it in federal court. That's abuse of power. What the U.S. Attorney's Office has been doing is an abuse of power. There's no other way to describe it. They're shielding their own corrupt acts because they say, yeah, we're the feds. We don't have to do anything. There's no higher power than us. Come and get us. Disgusting. All right, so let's continue. A second voir dire is not an appropriate remedy. So this is where the judge and the lawyers get to question them. They already did one during the trial. As the defendant has continued to sidestep their discovery obligations. And again, to repeat, Karen's defense team has no control over it. The Commonwealth is entitled to a fair trial and simply has sought what every criminal defendant in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is obligated to produce. The Commonwealth is entitled not to repeatedly be ambushed at trial and be permitted to effectively prepare for cross-examination of any witnesses. Strategic decisions do not alleviate a defendant from discovery compliance, and after 10 months, the only appropriate remedy is exclusion of these witnesses. A criminal defendant's constitutional right to call a witness on her behalf is not absolute and may be limited in the judge's discretion in the face of legitimate demands of the adversarial system. So, I don't know. I don't think anybody can even begin to guess at what the judge is going to decide here. Is she really going to say that these ARCA guys cannot testify because the U.S. Attorney's Office wouldn't comply with discovery laws by giving them? Because we know what evidence the ARCA guys have, because we know what they were sent. That came out during the voir dire last year. And we know what evidence they don't have, right? But we don't. So the only thing we don't know is what the U.S. Attorney's Office told them. But, so what does it matter, right? Does it matter? So from a practical standpoint, we can answer the question. From a legal standpoint, I can't. But from a practical standpoint, as a matter of fairness, the issue goes to, I don't want to say corruption, but if those communications from the U.S. Attorney's Office prejudiced the ARCA guys in any way by making them develop an understanding that this is what they wanted them to find, That's a problem, right? And that's something that would continue even if the ARCA guys are now hired independently by Karen's team, because there is a tendency in every single human being to, once they take a position, to dig in their heels a little bit, because otherwise it would be embarrassing. So if the ARCA guys, let's say now, in Brennan's motion back in December, we learned, well, he wanted to know what material evidence has been sent to the ARCA guys after the trial. And that's interesting. So I'm going to guess, I don't know, that the prosecution sent them things like, for example, the text stream data. And so, as I've said in other shows, this means that if those ARCA guys are on the stand and Brennan says, "Did you get the text stream data that we sent you?" "Yes, we did." "Did you look at it?" Well, if they say no, we didn't, then their credibility's gone, right? If they say yes, they did, what are they going to say? Are they going to say that text stream data, they can't explain it? It does show an accident that happened at that time, but hey, we don't know. We can't explain it. Or are they going to change their opinions? But to change their opinions is embarrassing, because it means that their conclusions in the first trial were wrong. And nobody likes to do that. Nobody wants to be wrong. And especially guys that are, let's face it, those ARCA guys were also, now they were qualified, but they were arrogant, especially Dr. Wolf. But they were both extremely arrogant. These are not the kind of people that want to ever say they made a mistake, ever. So are these guys going to get on the stand and say, "Oh, we've looked at text stream data. Yep, we had it wrong"? They're going to want to try to find ways not to do that. So that's why it's so important to know how they got down the wrong path in the first place. I think now it's going to be difficult, because it's not like the U.S. Attorney's Office is going to send them a letter saying, "Hey, you know what? We've got a personal connection to a murder defendant's lawyers." And again, I don't know. I'm speculating on that. I'm not. That's a hypothetical. So let's say there's a personal connection between David Yannetti and Josh Levy. It's not like Josh Levy is going to say, "You know what? I'm friends with David Yannetti, and I'm trying to help him with his murder client. So we need you to help us by coming up with a conclusion that John could not have been hit by a vehicle." That's not going to exist. That's not going to be in a letter. These guys aren't stupid. That doesn't mean they didn't take that from their communications, because it would have been subtle. It would have been subtle. But the very fact that the federal government, the U.S. Attorney's Office, was investigating a state's murder case that was underway, those ARCA guys are smart enough. They would have picked up. They understood that the U.S. Attorney's Office did not believe the state's conclusions. And they knew, just as a practical matter, what they were being hired to do, whether they were told or not. But it is important that all that evidence be given to the prosecution now, so we know for sure. Was there some subtle way of, telling them what they wanted? And why won't the U.S. attorneys release this? If there was nothing suspicious that went on, why not release it? If all the U.S. attorney did was completely above board, and they said, "You know what? There's some fishy stuff here. We're not sure. So we really want to get an independent expert." So, for instance, in the Birchmore case, they went and got the feds hired at least one, I think maybe two, independent medical examiners to look at the reports, the autopsy reports from the medical examiner used in that case. Now, that original medical examiner, the one employed by the state, concluded that Sandra committed suicide. Now, obviously, the feds didn't believe that. And really, I don't think the state did either, and I don't think the town of Stoughton did. Everybody was trying to get to the truth. Seems that. Well, only time will tell. But they just couldn't quite put it together. And once that medical examiner ruled it was a suicide, it made it harder. It tied everybody's hands. You weren't going to be able to get warrants after that, or it was going to be hard. So, in that situation there, let's say the feds would just honestly doing the job. So they give the information that they have, the medical reports, to an independent medical examiner and said, "All right, tell us what you think. Was this suicide or not?" If that's the case here in the Karen Reed case, so if it's just a matter of the feds were like, "All right, we want to know what happened here. We're not sure. There's some odd things. Maybe he was hit by a vehicle. Maybe he wasn't. We want you guys at ARCA to give us an idea." Well, if that's the case, if it was just an honest mission like that, why hide the letters from the prosecution? Why? Why won't the feds give over what their instructions were to the ARCA guys? Now, they're probably going to say it's a federal privilege. We're protecting our privilege. Give me a break. Bullshit. You've interfered enough in this case. We already know about the wrongdoing you did. Justice hangs in the balance here. There's no legitimate reason that they couldn't release those letters. Whatever their messages were to the ARCA guys when they hired him and during the course of their relationship, that all should be turned over to the parties. That they're not doing that the U.S. Attorney's Office did not do that is fucking suspicious as hell. It's suspicious. There's something shady going on. Something was in those letters that they don't want anybody else to see. I don't think there's any other conclusion than that. All right. Let me see if there was any other things that developed. And if not, all right. I think that was it for the list. At least that's the ones I remember. So I will go to, let me do the thank yous first, and then I will go and see if anybody has any. There's so much that's happened in the last couple weeks. I'm sure I've forgotten some things. So Macy, new member, welcome. We've obviously seen you here before, but thank you for joining the membership. So I haven't done anything with membership things. It's just I've been busy. So basically, you're paying that. What is it? $1.99 a month or something? I forget. You're just doing it to support the work that I'm doing. At this point, you don't get a T-shirt with it or pizza night or anything like that. We'll try to do something in the future. We did do one members only show, but basically, you're just supporting the work. So thank you. I appreciate it. Rosewater, good to see you. Alert all males. You can win the chance to be Karen Reed's date on a double date with Lucky and Mary Bagwell. Wasn't there a contest for a Valentine's date that got canceled or something? I don't know. I forget. Pat, good to see you, man. Philly lost, then won. Lally lost, then Hank won. Well, that Super Bowl is still coming, Pat. Claire Marie, I forgot to hit these. Claire Marie, thank you very much for your support. As always, I appreciate it. You know you're always appreciated. And Rosewater again, everyone needs to accept SD's transition and stop making fun of her. Oh, come on. Be nice to her, Rose. I think she's just a lost soul. We can afford, one of the things, there's a lot of people that have newly come on. When I say newly, like say since the trial on to follow this case and believe that Karen was innocent. They're not bad people. They're not stupid people. So we have to be patient. And now Esty is not someone that came on new, but we have no reason to think she's a bad person. People latch on to these causes for whatever reason. I mean, they're not really hurting anybody. It's different. It's not like she's going on court TV once a week like Nick and spreading falsehoods or things that are debunked. So, Esty's pretty harmless. Gene, thank you for the super sticker. I very much appreciate it. Gene, thank you. And James Clay, good to see you, my man. Thank you again. Kevin, how come Turtle said the feds were coming for the McAlberts, but now says he never thought the feds were coming? Karen is cooked. Justice for JJ. So Turtle Boy is experience with the feds here, or his, is very interesting to me. Let me take a there's some insider stuff I can tell you. All right, so many months ago, I I slipped something onto the show intentionally, hoping that it wouldn't make a huge splash, but that Turtle would pick up on it. And he didn't grab the ball and run with it. I was surprised. I thought, well, maybe he didn't see it. So I kept doing it. And then, and he was never running with it. And I couldn't believe that he wasn't. But then we know he knows now, because I mentioned this also on the show that me and Kate did with Brother Counsel. And what we know is that for some of the witnesses that testified before the federal grand jury, that they put a lot of effort into these witnesses. They used 3 U.S. attorneys to question them, one of them being the U.S. attorney itself, which is pretty much unprecedented. But to blow all that away, according to the witnesses, the U.S. attorney used a blow-up version of TB Daily News. Now, when I leaked that out, knowing Turtle Boy as we do, I mean, do you remember, this is a guy that was so proud the day his name first appeared in a document related to Karen Read, and then hit the proudest day of his life was when the trial was stopped for an hour and a half to debate whether he should be allowed in court. And he was talking about that show for the next couple of weeks, right? He didn't run with this, though. I mean, if I learned in the next trial that the U.S. attorney, well, let's change a little bit. I mean, if the U.S. attorney is super powerful, right? But let's say I learn in the next trial that Hank Brennan used something that I wrote and used that in the trial. That'd be cool. I'd be bragging about it. I mean, why not? That'd be fun, right? And for Turtle Boy to learn that the actual U.S. attorneys, the federal court, used his blog to grill the witnesses that he was trying to intimidate and is trying to intimidate. He should be bragging about that. That he's not is more than just suspicious. It's revealing. And we don't know of what yet. So let's go back a little further. Turtle Boy, I didn't follow this close. I had never heard of Turtle Boy back then, but my understanding is that going back a few years, Turtle Boy, I don't want to state this too specifically because I don't know, but supposedly helped the feds nab a January 6ther and then bragged about it on his blog. Again, and I don't know the details, so please, I don't want to get something wrong on that because I really don't know the details on it, any of it. So does that suggest that there was a relationship with the feds? I don't know. Or a non-official relationship. An official relationship would be as if the feds made him a CI, confidential informant. But there's a lot of loops you got to go through to get that official designation. That probably didn't happen, but it might have. But then this, is there somebody that's just from the feds are cooperating with him behind the scenes? Maybe. Well, let's look at all the evidence, right? So in April, Karen, over a day, convinces Turtle Boy to take up her cause, convinces him that there's a conspiracy. And we've seen those messages because Natalie was acting as a go-between and she screenshotted all that, not for nefarious reasons, but because they were using an encryption app. And so the message that they would send one to the other would disappear after 20 minutes or something like that. So in order to send that message that they were using her as a go-between, she would have to screenshot it. It just makes sense. But then those were all still in her computer and those were turned over to the state. And, but I had seen them before that. And then we saw a lot of them afterwards when they were revealed by the state in their documents. They've been revealed in other ways since then. But so Karen was really trying to push the fact that the feds were investigating this. That was a big selling point to Turtle Boy. And I think that was a decisive aspect that helped convince him that this really was a conspiracy. But even after he started reporting it over the next month and more, he really didn't talk about the feds. Now, one of my sources, and I had hardly any sources, but had told me, this is a law enforcement source, that the FBI, this was back when at the beginning, the FBI is taking over this investigation, which didn't happen and isn't the way it worked. But he wasn't completely wrong in that the feds were involved and the FBI was involved. But Turtle Boy was making Karen very unhappy because he wasn't hammering that, wasn't even talking about it. And so there was no official confirmation all summer that the feds even had an investigation until Karen, through a Freedom of Information Act, got found out that the FBI had showed up at Bridgewater State University, where Colin Albert was going to school, in order to deliver him a summons to go before the federal grand jury. Now, he wasn't there, but nonetheless, the FBI didn't know that. So when they showed up, they had to be escorted to his room by campus security. And that was in evidence. So that's what Karen got. And she was very excited because now this confirmed. They have contacts with the feds. They're inappropriate. It's corrupt. We don't know what it is. But the feds were telling them, for instance, when the federal witnesses would be testifying and stuff like that, there was a teleconference call in November of 2023 between David Yannetti, Alan Jackson, and Josh Levy. And Josh Levy asked them to try to get a delay in the trial. But through that summer, they didn't have anything that they could prove. Like, you can't prove, hey, yeah, I've got the U.S. attorney talking to me every day, but that's not proof. It's still your word. So finding through the Freedom of Information that Bridgewater State campus thing was the first thing that proved it. How did they even know to search for that, though? The only way they could have known that is if the feds told them. The only way, right? How would Karen and her team have known to file a Freedom of Information Act with Bridgewater State University? There's no way. They only knew, they had to have known because they had this improper close relationship with somebody in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they told them, hey, go get a Freedom of Information on that, and then you can prove it. That's why I say there's a lot of shady shit going on here with the U.S. Attorney's Office. So then she wanted to leak that out right away. She was very excited about it. Turtle Boy was on vacation. I was at Canterbury Lake Park with his kids. So she actually sent that to my partner, thinking we might report it on the channel, but we didn't. And he didn't. And she didn't wait. She gave it to other people, and other people put it out. What's more about the feds? All right, so let's catch up to Turtle Boy. There's a bolo put out for him in December. So he had been originally arrested in October and was waiting to stand charges for witness intimidation. So he's out on bond, and then he gets into an altercation, or not altercation, a situation with Lindsay Gaetani. You know the whole story there. I don't cover it much, and I'm not going to go into it. It's not my thing, because to me that's kind of a he said, she said. But at the time, that was enough to revoke his bond and put him in jail. So there was a bolo out. Be on the lookout for about 48 hours until he turned himself in. This was right around Christmas last year. So when I say last year, I mean December of 2023. And so while he was on the run, he managed to get, I won't say how, but the phone number for FBI agent Leah Ferreira, who was one of the FBI agents assigned to investigate the Karen Reed case. And he called her up, was leaving her messages, and she wasn't happy about it. I don't think she took any of the calls. And So I don't know. That suggests he doesn't have an official handler. If he was a CI, if he was a confidential informant, and that would mean he had a handler in the FBI. Well, he would have been calling that person, right? So I mean, unless that person just cut him loose, I don't know. Now then, in court, when at Turtle Boy's arraignment, his lawyer Bradle said he's been on the phone all morning with the feds. Now we don't know what that means. No, actually, I think what he said was I've been on the phone all morning with the FBI. Was he actually on the phone with someone from the FBI, or was he just saying that because he was trying to reach the FBI? What was he saying? I mean, they seem to really maybe think or hold out against all hope that the FBI and the feds had some information that would save the day for him. I don't know. What was what was that grandstanding by Bradle? That's the lawyer. I don't know. So there we are on that. But then we have the continuing strange behavior by the U.S. Attorney's Office that continues to this day, even now that Josh Slavy is now back at his sweet, cushy little job at Ropes and Gray. It continues to act corruptly in the U.S. Attorney's Office. So does Turtle Boy have a contact with the feds? We don't know. But back to why isn't he bragging about the fact that the U.S. Attorney's Office used his blog inside the grand jury hearing? There's a reason. And finding out that reason will unlock the puzzle. That's the key that unlocks the puzzle. So either he has some kind of a leak from the FBI or the U.S. Attorney's Office, and that's why he doesn't want to talk about that, because they're like, whoever is leaking him is like, no, don't touch that. That's possible. Or there's an inappropriate relationship between someone on Karen's team and the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they don't want him talking about it. But again, that relationship has to be inappropriate, because if everything was above board, they wouldn't care if Turtle Boy talked about it. So there's a big story here that remains to be told. There is a conspiracy. There's a lot of smoke there, and it has nothing to do with the Alberts or the McCabe's or the Proctors. Thank you, James. Appreciate it. Jill, good to see you. Sorry I was away, was very busy. Kevin, what do you think about Hank's new motion to sanction Karen's lawyers? These are, I addressed this a little bit before. I don't know. I guess Turtle Boy said it's about Proctor. There's a new communication from Proctor. Again, it's a nothing burger. I don't know what it's about. Hold on a second. So I don't know what it's about. But this stuff goes back. There was a similar motion, if I remember right, before the first trial from Lally. There was the obligatory attempt by the defense to have the judge dismiss these charges. That's still coming on this second trial. That'll be coming next month or just later this month. And then there's the retaliatory strike by the prosecution requesting sanction. It's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to go anywhere. The dude abides. All right, let's see. This will be good. I know you've been hella busy. Just know we appreciate your rational dude wisdom, man. Hey, thank you, dude. Thank you very much. Usually the dude gives us quotable enough things that we can put on a fortune cookie. This is not probably one of them, but this is appreciated. So thank you, dude. Maui. Thank you, Maui. All right, she want for $7, or I get to say Jay is a wimp. All right, Jay is a wimp, and I don't know who the real Jay is. I don't know. I don't need to know. Andy Dufresne says, please do a book signing. That seems like a weird concept to me, but again, we're still in a process here, right? And I kind of won't believe that everything is go until that book is ready for pre-order, which maybe a couple weeks from now. I'm not sure but again, that's if everything goes right, because they could still look at some part of that book and say, no, we can't do that. So I won't believe it until then. But they want a contract to do a second book, and then they messaged me with an idea. Well, because we want to put out the second book quickly, we think you should get a co-writer. And they had a professional writer that they use a lot, that they wanted me to be considered taking on. And I looked into that person's work, and outstanding work. But that person's in California, doesn't follow this case. I don't think it would save me a lot of time. I would just have to be explaining to them what's going on. I might as well just write the book. The emails would be, just as much. However, I did like the idea of getting a co-writer, and who better than Kate Peter? So I haven't talked to her in a couple weeks, but when the last time I talked to her, she agreed to be a part of it. So hopefully, again, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but if the book stays on track and all goes forward, and they do want us to do a second book, and she still agrees to it, that's will be the co-writer. And Kate's an excellent writer, and she's smarter than me, and she has close access to all of the witnesses. So that to me would be, we have to see what happens over the next couple months in the second trial. But to me, at this point, a second book would be about the aftermath. So now, if there is a verdict, the witnesses would be able to talk. So it'd be great to talk to them. And I could get access to a couple of them maybe, but the person who really would have access would be Kate. So I would have to sit down with Kate and say, what do you want to do? How do you want to cover this book? What do you want to do in a second book? Because it would be a 50-50 partnership. So there's no junior partnerships. There's just partners. And so I'd have to see what she wants to do. Caroline's sweet, and that was a sweet super sticker. Thank you very much, Caroline. I appreciate it. I wish I could award you a book, a pre-ordered book sale for that. Maybe there'll be a way to do that down the road. I don't know if there is. And Marco says, keep up the good work. Looking forward to the book. The truth will prevail. We hope the truth will prevail, right? We don't know. We don't know. OJ walked free. Casey Anthony and many others. So we don't know. But what worries me the most is that defense teams. Oh, I'm just reading. So Stephanie, hi, Steph. Stephanie says that Grant has shared, he thinks the sanctions are because the defense did not impound a motion with direct quotes. Oh, okay. So back to maybe, I don't know. Turtle's been going after John's nephew. I don't know. Oh, impound a motion with direct quotes from, I don't know. That could be. So, well, that was filed at the end of the day today, so I think we'll see it next week. So Grant could be right. Grant did a post in response to something Turtle Boy had said. He did a post this week on the SJC ruling, and it was great. It was brilliant. I told him that in my reply there. I mean, it just, unfortunately, Grant, you never know. There's a lot of nuttiness but that post was brilliant. So, I mean, I wish somebody could advise Grant, don't do the journalism thing. You're not a journalist. Be the lawyer. You're in law school. You're going to make a fine lawyer. Do that. Stay out of the circus. Because you do all these weird dot connecting things in journalism that doesn't make sense. But the article or the response you had there was brilliant. Go where your talent is. That's where your talent is, dude. So he might be a good lawyer. I don't know. He's so odd and unstable that you don't know. But I think he would be a good constitutional lawyer, being able to argue about those kind of things I know I could see him in the future doing his own arguments in front of the SJC. Those things I think he's very good at. All right. So I'm looking at the questions. Did I miss anything else, guys? Aperture. Kevin, looking at all the recent drama around the Sally Port, do you still think it was appropriate for Proctor to bring the SUV to the Canton PD Sally Port? Why not? There's nothing, there is not one bit of evidence that shows any wrongdoing in the Sally Port. Not one. Do you think it was odd that the trooper was looking at the broken taillight? Do you expect it to be looking at something else? So no, we had just some confusion about when the video was coming in, and you had a technical mistake. No, we all know now that we've learned since that video records in mirror image, and then it reverts back on playback. But there was obviously some issue from taking that video from that system and putting it on the court system. That's all it was. So no, there's no evidence of any wrongdoing at the Sally Port, and it's frankly crazy to believe that evidence was taken from there and that was and planted at the crime scene that night, because just the timelines don't work. The Sally Port door closed at 5:42. By then, the CERT team had been digging for a few minutes in an area that was the size of 2 parking spaces. 7 guys digging shoulder to shoulder with a WBZ film crew there filming it, and with Lieutenant Tully taking pictures. So unless everybody's in on it, nothing happened at the Sally Port. And it was the most logical place to put it. It's a mile away from the district attorney's office. It's always where they would have put it. So, no, I don't see anything there. Roberta thinks that Karen will be acquitted. Are you sure about that? I don't listen to Roberta, but it doesn't sound like the Roberta I remember. The Roberta, unless something's really changed, Roberta's always been one of those, I believe she's going to be hanged, and she'll be there to put the rope around her neck. I don't know. But I don't listen to Roberta, so I don't know. That seems a little hard to believe for me, but all right. So Grant was right this week. The feds closed out ARCA. All right. I disagree slightly with that. So I saw Grant's post on that, and he said that document showed that the federal investigation was over. It did no such thing. All we know is that the contract ended with ARCA. That doesn't mean at all that the federal investigation was over. Now, I'm not saying the investigation is ongoing. I'm just saying there was nothing in that document that told us that. So what do we know? Is the federal investigation over? Well, first of all, there's over, and then there's officially over. And one of the strategies that the feds have long employed is that they love to be able to say, we can't talk about something that's under an investigation. So even if they're not doing any further investigation, they leave the book open, because once they close the book, then they can no longer use that excuse. So there is not going to be a tainted jury that would result in 12 people. You're not going to get 12 tainted jurors. So you're not going to get an acquittal. There is no chance, barring some dramatic new evidence that comes out for Karen, you are not going to get an acquittal. And they know it. They know it. They know there will be no. Now, a hung jury, that's a different thing. You only need one juror for that. So, and Turtle Boy has been pretty open about, hey, we're going to get some juror on there. Yeah, they probably are. So that's why I think at this point, and I never want to see anybody arrested, but I believe charges have to be levied against that dismissed juror, because you have to send a message to any prospective juror. Do your job honestly. When you raise your hand to take an oath, tell the truth. Don't lie. Don't get on this jury unless you are truly objective and you fill out the questionnaire properly. You have not made up your mind on this case. I could not be on that jury. I wouldn't lie. Now I don't live in that county. I'm not, but had I lived in that county and I was summoned, I would not try to sneak my way onto the jury. No, I would put in the questionnaire that I have covered this case extensively, largely from the prosecution side. So every juror has to be honest, and the judge has them raise their hand to swear an oath every morning to say that they have not followed this in the media. I guarantee that juror did. And so if they can find evidence of that, they should charge her, because that's the only way to send a message to these jurors not to pull a stunt like that. Now, most jurors, 90% of them, 95%, 98% of them will take their job seriously and will not be. It's a grave thing to go into a court. You feel the weight of that. And jurors take that job seriously. And to raise your hand and take an oath and lie to a judge is a serious thing. But, so most jurors won't do that. But when you get these free Karen Reed people and these turtle riders, yeah, they would. That's why it's a cult. So, yeah, there is a good chance that one or two jurors are going to get on it. In fact, that's the defense strategy now. We know this because of the article, the strange article and video that came out by the Boston Globe in early January. And I accused them of doing this for David Yannetti. Now, I can't prove that. He saw me say it, but I believe it to be true because the article and the video was utterly bizarre. The Globe is already saying that the cost of a third trial would be too expensive. Why does the Globe care about that? The Globe never cares about how much money the government spends. There hasn't even been the second trial yet, but they're already starting a campaign that if there's a mistrial in the second one, we shouldn't have a third trial. That is freaking bizarre. That is freaking bizarre. There is no way that the Boston Globe did that article on their own. There's no way. There's no way. I would bet a limb that the Boston Globe did a favor for David Yannetti by doing that article and that video. It was bizarre. We went over on the channel. It was really bizarre. Ken Week says, Kevin, in a cover-up, why testify to driving by the flagpole when leaving? Just say you went back to Cedar Crest. I don't know. I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't know who you're talking about, Ken. Are you talking about Higgins? I don't know. I mean, Karen didn't testify, so I don't even know what you're talking about. Sorry, dude. So, by the way, if Thomas Fleming is still here, it's his birthday. So, is Tom here? I haven't seen him post. He's probably eating ice cream. He's probably got some special birthday ice cream, but it's Tom Fleming's birthday. So, if he pops back in, please say happy birthday to Thomas Fleming. And as always, thank you, Joe, for the work you do. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Dina, good to see you. It's my friend Dina, pale yellow. Actually, you see Dina is pale yellow that commented up there. What the fuck is going on with this thing? So the name of this channel comes kind of from that. She used to own a film production, small film production. Oh, yesterday was the birthday. Okay. And her film production company was called Pale Yellow Productions. So when I started this channel and not really knowing what I wanted to do with it, I started this and I started another one at the same time called Creepy Yellow Productions. And the idea was to just try to come up with a way to get a way to promote some of my fiction work. But so Creepy Yellow Productions was going to be for like creepy pastas and short stories and that kind of stuff. And Yellow Cottage Tales was going to be more for urban legends. So story that had a little bit of truth, that had or at least presented themselves as true. But at the end of the day, still just entertainment. I really didn't intend to get into true crime. So But thank you, Dina. But so that's why this is yellow. That's where the yellow comes from. In case you were wondering, I don't actually live in a yellow cottage. Yep, we do definitely have stories to tell. Why should I be arrested? I don't know. But listen, I don't understand anybody that lies in the performance of their duty should be charged. It's, just to send a message to everybody else. I don't care how somebody voted on the jury if they honestly did their trial, if they did the trial honestly, they did their duty honestly. But what that person did can't be tolerated, can't be accepted. And it's getting bad now because now defense teams are really realizing that if you have the right client, you can stir the public up with a bunch of nonsense because people don't ask any questions. Like I went over earlier about the Ring video. How many people in thousands of the free Karen Reed world even think to go look up? They just take the claim, oh, none of that video was taken. It's all suspicious. They don't even bother to ask the question to look up. So this is what we're dealing with now. And that's the public. That's a large percentage of the public. And so you need to start sending them. So if they're going to violate the law and their duty by lying under oath, there should be a price to be paid. If there's a movie about this, I am not going to be in it. The movie would be about John and Karen and the families. I haven't uncovered anything, so I'm just a guy in front of a mic. That doesn't make a very good character. So no, I won't be in the movie. I would love to be consulted on it to help write the script. So, but I did actually meet with a professional writer that works for Netflix a few weeks ago, and so hopefully he reaches out to me if he ever wants some consultation. Not that he's a professional, so his writing is going to be way better than mine. But if he ever wanted some consultation about the case or whatever, that would be cool. So Barb says Roberta thinks she'll get another hung jury because of the influence. Yeah, then that makes sense. I mean, we all kind of worried about that. Oh, Michael McCarthy. Nothing wrong with being a fiction writer, and it doesn't mean the only fiction in this case is the conspiracy theory about what happened to John in the house. I only say that because of the evidence. You could look at it if you want to, but you don't want to. Let's face it. So let's ask you, Mike McCarthy. Have you ever wondered about why there was no Ring video of what happened with the Lexus? How come across the street, which did have a Ring camera system, how come there's no video? Is that something that you found suspicious? Because that's something what all the conspiracy theory world does. So if that's something that you found conspicuous, Mike McCarthy, how come you never looked it up? How come you never went to Google and looked it up? Can you answer that? I mean, and there's a million other things like this. Did you know where the evidence goes? Did you know that it went to the evidence room at the district attorney's office and that's just how it works? And I didn't know before either at the start of this case, but that came out in the trial and it makes perfect logical sense. Did you know that though? Do you know it now? Do you want to know it now? Or is that just one of the many things that all you people look at that you like to think is odd, but it actually is explained? Just like the towing of the vehicle to the Sally port. That's explained. That's not mysterious. And on and on and on it goes. I guarantee if we sit down with each other, you're going to run a list of 10 things by me. At least 5 of them are going to have easy explanations that you could have looked up on your own, but you didn't. You didn't for some reason. You're not skeptical enough. You're not smart enough. You don't care about the truth enough. I don't know. I don't know you personally, but I guarantee that if you list 10 things that bother you about this case, there will be 5 things that were either debunked during the trial or you could debunk by taking 2 minutes and looking them up, and you didn't do it. I guarantee it. You're not my first guy. You're not my first free Karen reader. You're not my first one, brother. I guarantee it. And then of the other 5 remaining, 2 or 3 of those, I will give you a very good answer that doesn't completely satisfy, but very much explains it. And then there might be 1 or 2 things that in any case is a certain amount of things that are unexplained. But I'm not, then I will show you the evidence that proves that John didn't go in the house, and you will ignore it. I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it. Okay, Rainey. I've talked to Rainey on the phone. Rainey's a good guy. He's down in Florida. He's a smart guy. So, Rainey, do you understand? I kind of consider you a friend now because I talked to you. Do you want? Does it? Do you factor in the fact that many of these things that you were told were odd, we now know are not odd, like the fact that there's no Ring video. Once you know how it works, once you know with your own house, I don't know if you have Ring video in your house. You don't want that Ring video picking up traffic on the street, people walking their dogs. So that's why the system is designed that way. Now you know the explanation. Now, there's a lot of things like that in this case. Now, once you get the explanation, isn't the next step to say, why was I letting this stuff fool me before? Isn't the problem with me when I didn't find, why didn't I seek harder to find those answers? Maybe I need to look in the mirror. Maybe I need to look in the mirror and say, why wasn't I asking those questions? So I know you're a good guy, but do you look at that way? Do you look at these many things that have, so for instance, just another one of the crazy things that Nick Rocco says on Court TV. He used to go on and on about how and Turtle did, and Karen tries to put this out there, right? They put this, there's so much evidence. How many things do they get to put out there, like non-human hairs and gaps in the library video that turn out to be nonsense before some people develop a little bit of skepticism about things that they put out there. So another one was how the evidence, and this was, the defense tried to use this at trial too, so this was not just for social media duping people. So Karen, so in trial, they tried to point out with the criminologists that the evidence, such as John's clothing, wasn't logged into the state police evidence system until 6 weeks after John's death. Now, Nick Rocco tried to present this on TV. Oh, Trooper Proctor must have had it in his car. And that's why there's no canine DNA. He must have taken that to the laundromat. And then afterwards sprinkled on his microscopic taillight pieces. But that's not how it works. And I'm here to tell you how it works. It came out in the trial. I didn't know before. This evidence doesn't go into a state police evidence system until it needs to. Because it's the state police aren't conducting the trial. Who's conducting the trial? The district attorney's office, the prosecution. That's how it works. The prosecution's office is the Norfolk County DA's, which is in Canton. So that's where the evidence is going to be. That's where the evidence room is. That's where it's taken. So the evidence, including John's clothing, was taken and put in the evidence room. Now, eventually, some of that evidence, much of it, needs to go to a specialized lab for a criminologist to test it. They don't have labs at the DA's office. Apparently, they don't have SAL reports either. So it turns out that 6 weeks after John's death, that evidence that was in the evidence room at the DA's office now had to be transferred to a lab that was under the state police system. So that's why at that time it was entered into the state police. There was nothing suspicious about it. But again, on and on and on it goes with all these things. And I wonder how many of these things fooled you over time. If you go onto a used car lot and the same salesman tries to swindle you and give you dishonest information, how many times does it take before you say, all right, this guy's trying to con me? How many times? And so most people, if somebody tries to con them with bad information or lies, after several times, normal people get skeptical and they say, wait a minute, I got to start really taking away the grain of salt stuff that these people tell me. And this has just been the history of this case. Alan Jackson, May or June of 2023, in a hearing, made a big deal about a gap in the library surveillance video from 12:37 to 12:39. That's the time that Karen would have drove home, and it's not there. Who made this gap? It was like the Nixon Watergate scandal, right? Who deleted those 2 minutes? But what the defense knew, and they didn't tell the court, and they didn't tell us, was that that's bullshit. The camera is motion activated. There was no gap. Just nobody drove by the library at that time. In fact, we even now know the timeline was wrong because Karen's phone connected to John's Wi-Fi at 12:36. So we don't know what route she took to get home. There were a few different possible routes, and she apparently didn't drive by the library. But had she gone by the library, it would not have been between 12:37 and 12:39. It would have been sometime around 12:34, I guess. Sometime around that, because she was home by 12:36. But it didn't stop the defense from making a big grandstand. You don't think the defense didn't know that that was a motion-triggered camera? Come on, dude. If you don't believe that, I got some land in Albuquerque I got to sell you. Of course they knew. They're trying to trick the public. And that's what been the history of this case has been. So that's my question is, how long do you want to keep being tricked before you start developing some skepticism? How long? How long did it take? How many times did they get to dupe you? It's like Lucy with the football. Man, maybe nobody younger than unless you're my age or older, maybe you don't remember. But that's the old thing with Charlie Brown and Peanuts. Lucy would hold the football for Charlie to kick, and when he would run to kick it, she'd always pull it out, and he'd flip around and end up on his ass. And no matter what happened, and then he got a little afterwards, he started not doubting her, but she could always trick him into trying again. And every time she'd pull the football. Charlie Brown never learned. Free Karen Reed people never learn. The ones that do, and some eventually do, they flip because these questions don't make sense. The issues that the defense raise never add up. This is not just a matter of, well, we're all looking at the same evidence and, hey, we just got a different opinion. Oh, it's not like that, man, because the evidence is so clear here. The GPS shows that John's phone never went in the house. Listen, the defense, did you notice, Rainey and Mike McCarthy, did you notice that the defense did not question the accuracy of the GPS data? They didn't. So the GPS data showed that at the time when the health app thought that he was going up and down stairs, they were actually in the car on the way there. So the defense tried to create some doubt about that by suggesting that possibly that clock that the GPS was connecting to inside the phone was as much as 3 minutes inaccurate. So what they were saying was that maybe it was 3 minutes off. Now, this is ludicrous. GPS relies on atomic clocks were invented to help make GPS accurate. They need accurate clocks. But let's just buy into that argument for a second. Let's just say that maybe somehow the GPS on John's phone, instead of Karen and John took the right-hand turn from Cedar Crest onto Fairview at 12:24 and 18 seconds. Now, that's after the end of the stair climbing claimed by the health app. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that John's clock was off by 3 minutes, and that turn was actually at 12:21 and 18 seconds. Just for the sake of argument. I think it's crazy, and there's other reasons to believe that that's nonsense, because we also know what time John called Jen McCabe to get the address. We know what time he punched it into Waze. We know the time they went by the Jewish temple on their surveillance. We know how long it would take to get to the house. So there's a lot of reasons to prove that clock argument was bullshit. But let's just, again, for hypothetical reasons, because you guys are looking for reasons to be skeptical, right, about that. All right, let's accept it for hypothetical that clock was 3 minutes off. But what you didn't notice, for some reason, is that the defense never challenged the accuracy of those GPS points, which showed that John never went in the house. They never challenged it. The GPS has the strength of the signal coming to the phone from the satellites is always known from second to second, and it changes. There's up to 26 satellites or something like that that can get picked up, and on average, it's usually picking up, 17 or something like that. It picks up a lot but objects block the GPS, weather, but you always know what the strength of the signal is. So the margin of error is normally only about 15 feet. GPS is very accurate. However, there are times when the signal might weaken, and when it weakens, the margin of error expands. But it's always measurable, always, every second. So John's phone, there were only a 4-second period that the margin of error became large enough to include the house. Only 4 seconds. That's it. So to believe John went in the house. Now, the GPS that point had already reached the far edge of the property by, I don't have the data in front of me, but by about 12:24 and 40 seconds. So literally like 25 seconds after they took that right-hand turn onto Fairview from Cedar Crest. So she took the turn, stopped briefly in front of the driveway for a few seconds, and then drove to the edge of the property. And that's the last known GPS position of John's phone until it's picked up in the morning. It's in that time that there's a 4-second period where the signal weakens enough that the margin of error. So you would have to believe that John ran from that spot at the edge of the property to the house and then ran back to the exact same spot, and his phone was found there underneath John. You would have to believe that he did that in 4 seconds. Now, if he is Usain Bolt, it's possible that if you have him at with a starter's pistol, like a race, he runs from that spot where he was, runs to the porch, touches the door, and runs back. If you're Usain Bolt, you could probably just about do it in 4 seconds. But there's definitely no way that you could run into the house, get mauled by a dog, beat up, and then end up back in the same exact spot. There's no GPS point that shows at any time the phone in the driveway, in the yard, going in the direction of the driveway. None. So the GPS shows, without any doubt, that John's phone, at least, never went inside the house. You can't argue it. It's as bulletproof as the phone record that says you called your mom yesterday. Data sometimes often is open to interpretation. This is not one that is. This is bulletproof. John's phone simply didn't go in the house. That's a fact. That's a fact. It's beyond any dispute. It can't be faked. It can't be manufactured, manipulated. John's phone never went in the house. And this is not something where I'm going to sit here and say, oh, we could agree or disagree, be nice to each other. Yeah, we can be nice to each other. But if you think there's even a chance that John's phone went in the house, I don't know what to tell you. We can agree. You might think the moon is made of cheese, and I disagree, but it's not just a friendly disagree. I mean, it's a friend. I don't care if you believe the moon is made of cheese. I still like you, but it's not. I don't know what to tell you. It's not made of cheese. Too bad. I like cheese, but it's not. Now you have to start from, all right, the phone didn't go in the house. Is it possible that John went in the house without his phone and then ended up unconscious on top of his phone at the edge of the property? If you're going to entertain the possibility that Karen Reed is innocent, you have to explain that. You have to come up with a coherent theory as to how John ended up on top of his phone, even though his phone never went in the house. You have to do that. You can't just say, oh, no, I don't want to hear any buts. You have to do it. You have to do it. That's your job. There's no other way around it. There's no shortcut. Now, maybe you could conjecture that Karen stopped at the driveway and John jumped out of the car and ran to the house, but he left his phone behind on the seat. And then Karen drove to the edge of the property to wait for him. And when he didn't come out, she saw his phone in the seat and she said, F you, and she threw it out the window into the yard. That's the closest scenario I can conceive of. But now you have to explain how John ended up on top of that phone, and that's where they found him. And you have to explain why Karen has never said this. So again, I don't know what to tell you. You can just, we can go on forever saying that the moon might be made of cheese. I've never been to the moon, but I'm pretty sure it's not made of cheese. And I don't really, I wouldn't really take anybody seriously that thought it was. Now, I might still like them. I might, have a beer with them, but I can't really respect, their opinions because they think the moon's made of cheese. If you really look at this evidence here, you have to explain what I'm saying here. You can't skip around it. You can't. The phone didn't go in the house, and John was found on top of the phone. It's crazy. It's 72 feet, not 62. So, again, I can be especially I'm understanding and forgiving of people that are just following this case superficially, looking at the evidence, on what they see on the news and a little bit in social media, and people are pointing out the odd things. I can understand why people say, okay, well, that's kind of odd, butt dials and whatnot. All right, I get it. But for anybody that's a serious thinker and has looked at the evidence and has watched the trial and knows this evidence, if they still believe that John went in the house, you're a blue cheeser. Your moon is made of cheese guy. I don't know what else to say. I can't, it becomes impossible to explain anything to you because you just don't want to understand or you're incapable of it. I don't know. I mean, and I'm sorry if that's mean. I really don't mean it to be. The evidence is so clear on this that, you get to a point in life where you can't convince everybody of everything. And I know myself, over the course of my life, I've probably made that mistake many times. It's hardwired into my nature sometimes to if something is really obvious and is a really foolproof explanation, I'm tempted. I have this naive belief that you can convince someone of it if you just give them all the information and the logic. But I have to recognize that it's just not the case, because with some people there's a limitation to their ability to think, and that's not the case with Rainey. I talked to him; he's a smart guy, um, but that's a factor with some people in this case here. A lot of them. But then with other people, there's just this powerful need to believe in something, and it can't really overcome it. There's a need. Um, there's some that's so that's where intelligent people basically allow themselves to be fooled because they, for some reason, need to believe in this, and that's a personal thing with people, and I don't know why. Like, it's personal to each person. So you guys were talking about Esty before. I don't know why she believes in this, but she clearly gets a social benefit out of it. She's made friends. She's out demonstrating and all these things all the time. Um, so we can understand what her need is as to why she wants to believe in this. But it's going to be different for different people. So I don't really know. I know, Emily. You feel like you can just convince people. But this is, like I said, there's nothing debatable here about a lot of this stuff. There's things that are debatable, but not, there's a lot. I can't, we have to be a little bit speculative to try to explain as amateurs how those injuries occurred to John, what caused the injuries in the arm. Hopefully, we didn't get a good explanation in the first trial. And that is close enough to adding up to reasonable doubt on the first trial. We're supposedly going to get a much better explanation in the second trial, but we have to see it. We have to see it. Just looking at the comments. Yeah, absolutely, Ken. 227 didn't happen. Not even going to go over it now. It's not rational to believe in 227. Again, it's a blue cheese argument. Moon has made a cheese argument. John was definitely never in the house. Well, the phone was definitely never in the house, and realistically, he just wasn't in the house. 72 feet, 4 seconds. According to Trooper Paul, they measured the distance at 72 feet from the front door. How many people we have here? I haven't even looked at this. 333. All right. So, I like this number, 333. Well, there's people watching on Twitter and Facebook too. Those are harder to tell. I know these numbers look lame next to the free Karen Reed numbers, but it is what it is. I think it's one of these things that once people realize that this is just a hit and run case, most people lose interest in it. But if you believe it's a conspiracy, it just grows. It's a titillating conspiracy, so the 72 feet is the measurement from where John was found to the door. Now, as far as the measurement of how far the vehicle went in reverse, I think it was pretty close to that on that too. I forget if it was 62 feet or 72 feet, but they actually don't really know because the vehicle data records 5 seconds before and 5 seconds after the triggered event. So in this case here, when Karen punched the vehicle in reverse, I don't know why this is. Turn the light up. When Karen punched the vehicle in reverse, that triggered is the word they use, the creation of an event in the vehicle data. And when from that moment when the trigger happens, it records 5 seconds of data from before the triggering moment and 5 seconds after the triggering moment. So, but John was struck 4 seconds after she started going in reverse. But then 1 second later, the data ends. And by the time the data ended, she still had not hit the brakes. So we actually don't know how far she went in reverse, but it couldn't have been too much further. Now, the distance from the edge of the property to the driveway was, I believe, about 80 feet. You can look this up actually on Google Maps and measure it, but I believe it was about 80 feet. And she had pulled forward. We don't know how far, but again, we have in that data, because it goes back 5 seconds before, for 2 or 3 seconds, she's in drive going forward, and then she hits the brakes and punches it in reverse. So that's what we know. But we don't know exactly how far she went in reverse. Oh, trial world, Jesus. Oh boy. You never had 50 dates. I'm pretty sure about that. Jury nullification is going to be a problem, James. Yeah. Yep. But the point of what I was saying earlier was that I think the defense cost her a chance at an acquittal, because I think had the defense not gone so hard after witnesses that are clearly just normal, regular people, it. I think the defense, by using that strategy, pissed off the jury, because these people really came across as just nice people on the stand. I mean, the cops, the first responders, the witnesses, they really did. So to go after him in that way, I think was a mistake. That this isn't a mafia trial where all the witnesses are other people in the mafia with criminal histories. These are people with no criminal history, and they came across as just ordinary, regular people, just like most of the jurors. So I think that was a mistake. I think the prosecution didn't really prove its case very well. So to me, had they, I think had there been no defense at all, it wouldn't have been. Karen would have done just as well, and maybe better, because I think the way they went after the witnesses hurt her. But who knows? All right. So it's good to be back. I don't know when the next show will be, and but I will be back to doing hopefully at least one show a week. I like to doing the Fridays. I didn't do one last Friday because I was really hurrying to try to meet the deadline on that book. And no, it's not 4 pages. It's actually pretty long. It was almost too long, but I think there's a hearing maybe this Tuesday. So we always stream the hearings. So but again, thank you. Let me just make sure I thanked everybody properly. All right, I did get everybody. Oh, I forgot Lazy Susan's comment. I missed Hillbilly too. I'm sorry, guys. Hillbilly, glad you're back. Thank you, Hillbilly. Good to see you, my man. Hope you're feeling good now. I think you were sick when I talked to you a couple weeks ago. And Lazy Susan said, "An unchecked lie becomes the truth." That was a great quote from Brennan, right? So I wonder where that quote is originally from. I guarantee Brennan borrowed it from somewhere. But thanks for checking. So if you're someone that is watching, happens to watch this video, that is on the fence, you maybe been following the case for a while and you're just trying to follow it more closely now as we get close to trial. Good. I just want you to keep asking questions and applying the logic of the case. I want you to understand that most of the odd things have very mundane explanations. And on that side, they don't want to give it to you. So, like I did tonight with the ring, it's an easy explanation that anybody can look up. Anybody can look up. So start developing a sense of skepticism, but, apply your own thinking and figure it out. And I don't want to tell you what to think. I just want to give you the evidence, give you some of the logic, but at the end of the day, let you reach it yourself, because that's the only thing that really works. I'm not on the side of the prosecution. I'm not on anybody's side. I started covering this case with, like I said earlier at the beginning of this video, ignorant and just learning as I go and trying to be fair. And when you do that, you're going to end up thinking very much the same as me. Now, not exactly the same. People disagree on the question of intent on this case. So, and I don't know. I mean, we don't know. The issue of intent is a difficult one here. The issue of intent, for people that say that that's not proved, I don't necessarily disagree. I mean, I don't think we know what she knew and when she knew it. So it's a mixed bag. We can go on to that we've talked about it before. But on other issues, it's certain that the Lexus, we know for a fact that the Lexus struck a pedestrian-sized object at around 12:32, and I'm going to say 12 seconds, but that's plus or minus a few seconds. And John's phone last moved at 12:32, 16 seconds, so just a few seconds later. That's bulletproof evidence. I'm not trying to, prejudice a jury pool or anything like that. I'm just saying that's the facts. So, and it matters to the innocent witnesses who are being persecuted when they didn't do anything wrong. And matters to the O'Keefe family too. And it matters to us in the public, because this is going to go on and on. This strategy, if it succeeds here, is going to be used again. Even if Turtle Boy's in jail, they'll find another Turtle Boy to do this. Look at all the grifting law tubers that have jumped on this case, that don't want to cover it honestly, because they know it's a way to build their client base. It's like a big free commercial for them. If you come on here as a lawyer, if you start your own channel as a lawyer and you start promoting the conspiracy, within a couple of weeks, you'll have the attention of tens of thousands of people. That's like a free commercial. And look at Bettero now. Bettero went from being a weird little guy who was saying odd things on Young Jelly's channel, really odd things, to being accepted as co-counsel on Turtle Boy's case. And I listened, and he actually did a fair job in court. So he's not an idiot. He says idiotic things when he goes on these channels, but in court, he was fine. So here's a guy that was willing to say idiotic things to appeal to the mob, but it was a good strategy. Because of it, it got him on Turtle Boy's defense team. And then now, a couple of days ago, it was on Channel 5 here, local Boston News, announced that Bettero has been added, or they're to Karen's team, or at least they're trying to add him. Man, so now he's gone from just being weird little guy commenting on Young Jelly's channel to being on the news as being added to one of the most famous now criminal defense teams in the world. That has dramatically elevated his exposure and his status. That's going to lead to a boom in new business for him. A boom. That guy just made, by being a creepy dude on Young Jelly's channel, he's parlayed that into, over the next several years, hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions. It was a smart strategy. And he's not the only one doing it. Melanie Little, the lawyer, no. I mean, it's just more and more jumping on board. But you're selling your soul to do it. You're selling your soul. And I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but I'm just, as a matter of fact, I was in that position, but just not as a lawyer. But when I started covering this case, I leaned towards the conspiracy. And after messing around with a couple of trying to develop YouTube channels for a couple of years, all of a sudden, my channel was growing fast. And I was popular with those people. Felt good. Now people are watching. People are saying, we love Yellow Cottage Tales. We love Kevin. But I didn't sell my soul. I kept pursuing the truth. And though I was ignorant about a lot of things, I knew the question. I knew the logic of the conspiracy theory didn't make sense. I kept asking questions. And that pissed off that crowd. And because of that, I lost the team that had grown up around me, about a dozen people. I lost 40% of my subscribers in one night. And I went from having the first live I did when I covered the hearing, we had like 2.5 thousand people watching despite technical difficulties. But go 4 months later, when I was no longer when the Free Care and Read crowd was no longer happy with me, I was doing shows that had an audience of 20, 30 and getting sent food and threats and to my house all the time. But I stood my ground. So yeah, it was an opportunity for me. And I gave it up. Because the truth matters more than that. You can't put a price on truth. You can't put a price on integrity. Now, most of these other channels, they weren't willing to pay a price. They wanted to do they were willing to do and say whatever it was to benefit them. Young Jelly, the Glare, and the YouTubers like that, they never asked an objective question. They never have researched how long the range of Ring video is. They don't know that. They don't want to know it. Same thing with Melanie Little. I hate to say it, same thing with Brother Counsel. Mark Petero, all these guys. I mean, it's the same thing over and over and over again. I don't know. It's disappointing, but shouldn't be surprising, I guess, right? So, I don't know. You pursue the truth, and then whatever happens, happens. If pursuing the truth causes you to lose everything and get you killed, so be it. If pursuing the truth eventually benefits you in some way, good. But pursue the truth. All right, guys. 3 hours in this chair. I am going to be hurting. Thank you, guys. I will talk to you soon.